If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
Doctors, nurses, caretakers, or anyone who works in the medical field, have you ever encountered or experienced any paranormal, demonic, ghostly, or haunted sightings in hospitals?
Great-grandmother's strange experience. My great-grandmother was in her early 20s living in the town of Miles in Australia. Late one night she went to collect her sister from the public transport depot. Her sister worked at a hospital out of town and frequently returned home late. On this particular evening, as my great-grandmother walked toward the station, she spotted a small group of 5 or so men standing huddled in a circle as if they were looking at something on the ground. When she came closer, she realized that all of these men were bald, pale, and roughly the same height. They were dressed similarly and didn't acknowledge her as she passed. She felt uneasy but continued walking so that her sister wouldn't have to pass the group alone. What she saw further up the road stopped her, another 2 groups of the same type of men. She thought that they might be a part of a tour bus group, but as she continued her walk, she didn't see a bus. On the route to the station, she passed several more small groups of identical men spaced out along the road. She soon frightened herself enough to break into a run. When she arrived at the depot, her sister was waiting. Without explaining, she dragged her sister toward where she saw the men, only to find the street completely empty. My great-grandmother told my grandmother this story in confidence later in her life. She never mentioned it to her sister that night or to anyone else for fear of people thinking she was crazy. She wasn't a woman prone to superstition or storytelling, so it intrigued me when my grandmother told the story to me. I looked online for similar occurrences but couldn't find a match, so I thought I'd share it here so the story would live on. Yes, I was working a night shift one night on a 10-bed palliative care unit. One of the patients was declining and was restless and trying to climb out of bed. I gave him medicine for pain at the start of my shift, and he calmed down and fell asleep. Background: this man had no family or friends visit him. He and I had bonded. He said I reminded him of his daughter. Sadly, she had passed. He had been with us for weeks while we got his symptoms under control and looked for a more permanent place for him to go to. At 2 a.m., I was giving pain medication to the patients. I sat down for a moment to chart before drawing up this patient's morphine. I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway of his room, waving at me and smiling. I ran over to him before he fell. As I entered the room, I realized he was still in bed, and he drew his last breath and passed. His ghost had been standing in the doorway waving goodbye. Hospital demon experience. Firstly, I would like to say that this is not my story. It happened to a friend of mine whom I'm trying to help find answers. I was recently hospitalized for respiratory, lung, and chest issues. I was given my own room that was private but very isolated. As I know now, the ward I was in was specifically isolated for COVID patients. The moment I submitted, the air in the room felt heavy. I just assumed it was because I'm tired and really don't want to be here. Saturday night I was waiting for the nurse to put my 4 back into my arm, as it gave me problems that morning and was removed. Round about 10:30 p.m. I was falling asleep when I was suddenly woken by what I thought was a nurse or some man that was trying to steal my phone from the table next to me. Upon looking at what's next to me, my room light switched on, and I saw this pitch-black man-looking thing in a crouch position running from my bedside towards the bathroom. An elderly lady had entered my room to use the bathroom, assuming it was her room. After visiting hours Sunday afternoon, everyone left, and the atmosphere felt heavy again. I did not mention the black shadow figure, as I assumed it was just my imagination. Round about 11 p.m. I ended a chat and decided I'm going to try to sleep. With that said, this weird sensation came over me to just pray for my family and make sure that they are safe. I was lying on my stomach with my right hand under the pillow and my leg bent when I suddenly felt this bat creature-like man thing pinning me to the bed. I could feel its body pressing me onto the bed. I tried to scream and move, and after struggling, I managed to turn myself around. What I saw, I hope to never see or experience again in my life. It had wings and a face like a bat/gargoyle. I managed to turn and saw the thing spring and disappear. I stayed awake the rest of the night crying, hoping not to see that again. I booked myself out of the hospital that next day. I would like to know what that was and why it did what it did. My brother saw me in the hospital. I wasn't there. So if you're interested in ghosts, you've probably heard stories about people seeing someone just when this person was dying, died, or was about to die. I experienced a lot of paranormal in my life, and I am also a practicing witch, whether you believe in the occult or not. However, what my brother told me still feels very strange. I am unsure about what to think or what actually happened. Basically, my brother ended up in a hospital due to cholecystitis. I wanted to visit him so many times, but he was often very tired, as they were giving him strong painkillers, and I did not want to bother him. His fiancée also told me not to come several times so he can sleep, which is fair. I thought about him all the time, prayed for him, and called several times a day just to check if he's okay. He had a surgery, and everything went well. A few days later we exchanged messages, and he said, "Thanks for coming even though we couldn't talk." I replied, "What? I wasn't there, your fiancé told me not to come." He said he saw me next to my mom when she was talking to the doctors. He was awake, and he was basically going from one room to another. I did not ask if it was before or after surgery, maybe I should. He said it must have been the meds then, but I had such a weird feeling about it. Somebody has a theory? Did I manifest/materialize myself there somehow because I wanted to be there? Did he just straight up hallucinate? What happened? Linger at the hospital. August 8, 2023. So just yesterday I took my baby sister to the ER. I went to park in the ramp, located on the SW end of this complex. I am walking eastward on the first floor, heading towards the lobby. Two nurses were walking towards me. They already crossed the children's waiting room and entrance and passed the double doors to the vending machine/cafeteria. But the larger cafeteria was closed, only the room with vending remained open in the evening. We then suddenly heard a young girl scream, "No mommy, don't leave me." The nurses stopped in their tracks as they backtracked to look around. I was slowly walking across the lobby in case there was a child that needed to be found. They searched the open areas quickly before stopping me to ask, "You heard that too, right?" I nodded, saying yes. I heard a young girl screaming for her mother not to leave. They looked at each other shivering. They had found no one. And with the large glass doors to the entrance, you could see no one. It was just us three in that lobby. They said to each other, "Glad our shift is over," and proceeded to leave. I shrugged and went on my way to see my sister. Shadow Nun of Zemun Hospital, personal sighting. I live in Serbia, Europe. In 2016 I was stuck for 2 days in a children's cardiology ward in Zemun Hospital for a 24-hour ECG. Usually they do these at home, but children aren't trusted to keep them on correctly. The ward is in a separate building from the communist-era built annex and is a really old and small 2-story building from the 1800s. I was alone in a huge room with beds. Alone because for some strange reason I was one of the 3 kids on the floor, excluding the babies and mothers, who had a separate room. I didn't see much of the other 2. One was a girl with measles, and the other boy was in his room. So I got the big room for myself. The room was rectangular shaped with beds lined up against each wall. I took the upper left corner bed and wheeled the TV cart right in front because nobody was going to watch it anyways except me. As night fell I stayed up past midnight. A nurse came in, turned off the lights, and told me to sleep, and after a while I turned the TV off and lay on my side. There was moonlight outside that lightened the room up still. I closed my eyes and waited for sleep to take over me. But it didn't. I felt a sudden urge to open my eyes. What I saw was a really tall nun-like figure, which is weird, because Serbia is an Orthodox country and has no classic Catholic nuns. We do, however, have some minority Catholics. She stood in the center of the room. It wasn't sleep paralysis, I could move, but I just laid low. She walked, or floated, her garments hit her legs, to each bed. She stood by each bed for a few moments and then headed to the next one. She did this for each bed in the room, skipping mine. After that, she walked to the door, came back to the center and disappeared. A year later, I googled some history, and it turns out the building was a frontline hospital for Austro-Hungarian soldiers in World War I, as Zemun was a border town between A and Serbia. The hospital was run by the local nuns of the Franciscan monastery in Zemun, which exists to this day. What was this? Hey guys. So years ago, probably about 13 years ago, my friend, 21 female, and I, 19 female, were in the little house in my old backyard. It was basically just like a small pool house with 2 beds/1 bath. It was around 9 p.m., and we were just hanging out inside talking about what to do for the evening. Out of nowhere, we hear this horrific scratching noise, like someone's long fingernails going around the whole house. It was absolutely terrifying. We panicked and hid in the bathroom and called my dad, who came out of our actual home, and he found absolutely nothing. Needless to say, the friend never came back to spend the night. Our old home was an old Civil War hospital, and a month or so prior we found a man had passed away in the barn to the right of our home. A few years prior, my neighbor's mother ended herself out back in the shed, and 12 years before that a young man passed away right in front of the houses to the right of our home. Needless to say, a lot of sadness was surrounding us. It's been years now, and I think about that all the time. I am a Christian and pray nightly and have been getting closer and closer with God. I am so happy we have moved from there because honestly, it really scared me. Anytime I'd talk to my parents about it, they would just blow it off and say I had a vivid imagination. Anyways, that's my unexplained story. It still scares me to death to think about it, but I've always wondered, what the duck was that? The abandoned hospital in my town is very active. It was also used in the movie Boneyard. When they blew the hospital up in the movie, apparently they actually burned some of it. So they abandoned it completely. The hospital still contains tables, desks, chairs, and numerous boxes of files. I'm uncertain if squatters or the paranormal are responsible for half of the sightings, but a friend of mine sneaked in and noticed a series of lights flickering on and off, which led him and his friends to an operation room. The light turned off, and they panicked and ran out. They also had batteries drained and could only make out the light outside through the roof access hatch they used. They also had a co-worker who was employed at a renovated sanitarium that was now a tree farm. The basement had screams and grabbers. There was still an attendance board where the old nurses signed in for duty, even though there was no chalk available. Some other things that I cannot remember happened that led him to quit. I'm a nurse, and lots of strange things happen in hospitals. My mom was recently admitted to hospice before she passed away, and it was a challenging experience. She was very close to death when transferred to hospice. We didn't want to leave her alone, so my brother, sister, husband, and I stayed the night in her room. We pulled all the chair beds out and laid down, although no one was sleeping. We kept hearing very loud scratches on the walls. It sounded almost like it was on aluminum foil and would quickly move from wall to wall. We all sat up when it started and silently just looked at each other. That would continue on and off for a couple of hours until the scratching gave way to loud bangs moving from wall to wall. We finally spoke on that one. It continued off and on until about 30 minutes before she passed away, and everything quieted down. But I swear something followed us home. Just hear me out. Almost immediately weird stuff started happening around the house. A drawer that sticks so badly is extremely difficult to open, and it remained stuck even after walking out of the room for just a moment. Footsteps running up and down the steps that even the dogs jumped up to investigate. Just the other day, I swear we're not crazy, I had a plate with leftover bacon on top of my air fryer in the kitchen. The air fryer was not on. My sister, husband, and I were in the kitchen just standing around talking. The plate didn't just fall off, it flew off, landing on the other side of the counter about 3 feet away. All three of us watched it. Lights that were turned off turned back on when re-entering the room, almost exclusively in my laundry room. That's just a few of the things. I read after that old superstition says not to directly go home after a death because something could follow you back home. Oops. Still can't explain it. This incident occurred about a year ago, and I still have no explanation for it. I, female 27, have been renting my house for about 3 years now, and at the time I was living with my housemate, female 25. She was working from home due to COVID, but I was going to work, as I work in a hospital. I usually work long hours and come home around 8 p.m. That evening I was coming home from work, and as I was walking towards the house, I could see it was in total darkness, at least from the front. I saw no lights. As I'm getting closer, the hallway light switches on. I make a note in my head, thinking, she, my housemate, must have seen me and switched the light on for me. How nice. I get in the house and start talking. Our rooms are upstairs. I assume she's in her room, but as I'm nearly shouting, there's still no reply. I stop, thinking that's strange. She's always home. Because of the pandemic we couldn't really go anywhere, and she texts me usually. At this point I feel weird and haven't left the hallway yet. I text her, saying, please tell me you're home. She texts back, she nipped out to see a friend and will be back shortly. At this point I'm panicking. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, so my initial thought is that there's someone in the house. I grab the kitchen scissors and search the house. It's a small 2-bedroom house, with no places to hide really, no basement, no attic, and no crawl space. I find no one. I was really confused. My housemate said that maybe she forgot the light on. However, that's not possible, as I saw it being switched on from darkness to light. We also have cats, but it's very unlikely they could do that. Firstly, I've never seen them going for the switch before. Secondly, even if they jumped, the hallway light is kind of a difficult one to press down. If it was the kitchen light, I could have imagined the cat paw turning it on, but not the hallway light. Can the light just switch on by itself? Never seen it before. Thanks for listening. Has this happened to anyone else? The thing at the hospital. This happened in a city in the north of Peninsular Malaysia. My family was visiting my wife's cousin, who had just given birth. She was in a room with 6 beds. 5 of the beds were occupied, and each bed had a curtain that could be pulled around the bed. It was visiting hour, and so the curtains were mostly pulled back, and there were visitors at all of the beds. The cousin was in the middle bed, and the last bed was occupied, but the bed opposite that one was empty. There were people visiting at the last bed. One of them was a young girl of, perhaps, not more than 7. As people were chatting, the girl suddenly cried out in anger, "Leave my auntie alone." Everybody looked to her. His mother went beside her and asked, "Who are you talking to?" Him. It could also be she because in Bahasa Melayu the pronouns are not gendered, she said whilst pointing to a spot just above the empty bed. "What's he doing?" asked the mother. "He's making faces at auntie." Her mother then said to her, "That's okay. He won't do anything. Come, let's go get a drink." She then led the girl out of the room. I think she was trying to calm the girl down. I did some asking, and I was told that that wing of the hospital is reputed to be haunted and it was the oldest building in the hospital complex. I guess kids really can see ghosts. I later realized that the mother didn't seem surprised at all at what the girl said. It was as if it was something perfectly normal for the girl to say. Paranormal encounters in healthcare. An elderly couple were both patients on the floor I worked on about 6 years ago. The wife had severe dementia, so she was not even aware that her husband was also a patient there while she was. He passed away in his room, and staff debated whether to tell her, given her severe dementia. Before staff had decided, she told my coworker, her nurse, that she could see her husband standing in the doorway of her room, telling her to come with him. We were all really creeped out. At that point she still did not know that he had passed away. Hospital haunt? Some background. I'm a nurse. We work in an older hospital, about 50 years old. This occurred in the emergency department around 6:30 p.m. During shift change my coworker and I are talking to each other and walking to the break room to gather our things. There is a petite nurse/healthcare worker in scrubs walking in front of us that we are closely following in the hall to the break room. We didn't recognize her as our regular unit staff. We never saw her face, as she never turned around or spoke to anyone that we passed in the halls. Well, she opens the door, enters the room, and the door is slowly closing. We were about 5 steps behind her, and I rushed to the door to prevent it from shutting. That's how close we were. I then opened the door prepared to greet this person, and there was no one there. This break room does not have any other rooms, exits, or even a bathroom. My coworker and I stood there dumbfounded because we both knew we saw the same lady enter the room right before us. Our description of her appearance was the exact same, and when we asked others if they had seen anyone matching her description, no one had seen anyone who looked like that on the unit. We even had a coworker tell us they had just seen us walking to the break room together, but there was not a third person near us. It was by far the most bizarre and creepy thing I've encountered in my life, and I have no explanation for it. Hospital haunt story. I saw lots of evidence working there for 2 years. The hospital I worked at had an urgent care run by its ER. I would often get sent to work my night shifts there. The urgent care used to be the ER before a new addition to the facility was built. The layout was poor. There were several one-patient rooms down one hall, but at the end was a 4-person room. It was difficult to see into that room from the nurse's station, and it was impossible to see the last bed if any of the privacy curtains had been pulled out. It was rumored that many years ago, a drunk was put in that 4th bed to sleep it off, but he choked on his own vomit and died. His safety had been compromised by putting him where he couldn't be monitored. I always felt bad about that. Weird stuff happened in that room. We used it very rarely, only when it was extremely busy. But the motion sense light turned on by itself fairly often when the room was not in use. The call bells in the room had long been disabled, but from time to time, the 4th bed's bell would chirp for no reason. But the weirdest thing by far was that, although we hadn't put patients in the room for a number of days, we'd find the privacy curtain between beds 3 and 4 pulled out, and no one knew who did it. Crazier, the motion sense light always went on when the curtain was found pulled. My coworkers found out fairly quickly that I am not easy to scare. So I would be the one sent to stock the haunted room, do the equipment checks, and investigate when the light came on. I felt compelled to talk to the spirit because I felt that maybe it just wanted to make sure we kept an eye on that room. As I turned off the light and drew back the curtain, I'd say, "I'm sorry that happened to you. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Haunted hospital is my workplace, and I find it fascinating. So I work at a hospital. I won't disclose the name or location for obvious reasons, but the hospital was once fully functional before being bought out. Now, the only open floors are the ER and the psych ward where I work. This place pretty much has a resident ghost we all call Greg. He's been known to set off call lights in the old abandoned units. He'll lock doors and knock off charts. When you're back in the abandoned units, you can feel like someone is right behind you. Footsteps happen often. Tonight was my first personal encounter with him. I was back getting supplies, and I heard footsteps. No one's there, it's ducking 9:30 at night, and the unit is abandoned. I shrug it off. Then the call light goes off. I look, it's the room across from me. I cut it off, and I get my stuff. Right before I open the door to go back to my unit, it goes off again, and I'm just like, shit, it's really Greg. So I just sigh and go, dude, cut that shit out, it's too late at night. Right as I walk in to cut it off, it goes off by itself. Very well could just be faulty wiring, but definitely a freaky coincidence. People say they experience feelings during these types of encounters, but I didn't feel anything. I think Greg just likes to let us know he's here. If he's even real. My hospital is definitely haunted. Unless a hospital is brand new, everyone who has worked there will tell you it's haunted. I didn't believe this until I started working as a nurse at a rural hospital 2 or 3 years ago. I had a few experiences myself on night shift and got told some by other nurses. The nurses' station on the ortho ward had a view of just across the hallway to the side. You could only see about a doorway's width of the hallway from inside the nurses' station. One night I stood up with my arms full of patient notes to put away when a woman in an old-timey white nurse's dress and hat ran in front of the doorway, except she moved too fast for normal human speed. Also, we were Navy scrubs. It occurred so rapidly that it took me a moment to comprehend it. However, upon realization, I dropped the notes and exclaimed loudly. The other nurses ran in, and when I explained it, they laughed, and one of the veterans, she'd worked on the ward for 14 years, said, "Oh yeah, that's the matron. She just likes to make sure everything is in order." I never saw her again, but after talking to other nurses on that ward, apparently she is a common appearance on the night shift. She never messes with anyone, she just gets seen every now and then. A few months later I got moved to the kids' ward. We had a playroom for the kids, but at night it was locked up. There are also security cameras all over the ward common areas for safety reasons, for example, parents who don't have custody visiting without permission, etc. One week I did 4 night shifts. 2 nights in a row I saw a little boy run from the bottom left to the top right of the screen on the security camera feed, but when I would check, the playroom was empty and the door was locked. On the 3rd night that this occurred, I informed my supervisor because I was extremely anxious. She told me that she hadn't been told about what I'd seen before, but there were plenty of ghosts on the kids' ward. In the back 2 teen rooms, patients would often ask the nurses to tell the patient next door to stop laughing so loudly, even though the adjacent room was actually empty. There are also parents reporting a nurse checking on their child through the night that doesn't match the description of anyone working and laughing being heard at odd hours. There were many stories. It was enough to make me believe that maybe ghosts are real. Bonus story, working in the nursery one night, I was bottle feeding a baby and chatting with the other nurse, who was originally from India. I asked her about ghosts, and she told me that at the hospital where she worked in India, there was a nurse who was bottle feeding a baby at night, and she fell asleep, dropped the baby, and it passed away. It was completely an accident, but the poor woman felt so guilty about it that she ended up ending herself about 6 months later. The nurse told me that since then, some nurses have reported that if they're feeling awful while holding babies at night, they'll feel a light tapping on their shoulder to wake them up. This woman wasn't going to let it happen to anyone else. Weird experience at hospital. My wife and I had our first child recently. He was born premature and is currently in a NICU, where we've been visiting him daily. Yesterday while we were visiting, I heard some of the nurses saying something along the lines of "your room is haunted too." This naturally piqued my interest, so I moved to listen to the conversation. Turns out, they were talking about the clocks in the patient rooms and the hallway. All of the clocks are analog, and the same type of clock to boot. I looked at the clock in the hall after figuring out that the clocks were what the nurses were talking about, and the minute and hour hands were going very, very quickly around the clock face, much faster than they ever should. I looked into a couple of other rooms I could see, and those clocks were doing the same thing. However, the clock in our child's room was functioning normally. This was the extent of the experience, and the clocks did eventually stop behaving that way and went back to their normal speed. No apparitions, no lights flickering. Just weird clocks. The thing is, I can't really explain it, and neither could my wife nor the nurses. They had never seen them do that before. My only guess is that somehow maybe several of the clocks had gotten delayed, and they all have some sort of internal self-correction. But why did that only happen to some of the clocks and not all of them? Nothing about it felt sinister. It was just something very unusual that several people witnessed and that we can't come up with a good explanation for. Any thoughts? A bizarre experience I had while in the hospital. When I was a child, I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, 3 days of which were in an induced coma, because I had hemorrhagic dengue fever and was in really bad shape, pleural effusion, kidney failure, vomiting blood, and everything else that could go with it. During one of the many blood tests I had to have while in the hospital, I was already very stressed from being pricked so many times, so I started pushing everyone because I absolutely didn't want to go through that again. Then, some nurses came into the room to hold me down and managed to get the test done. Right after they left, a guy came into the room and sat next to me. What I remember about him is that he was a very young guy, white, with black hair, and that he was wearing a white coat, even inside an ICU, unlike the other doctors and nurses. As soon as he sat down, we started chatting, but I don't remember what we talked about. I only remember feeling much calmer and that the conversation ended with me saying that when I left the hospital, he and I should get ice cream together at McDonald's, with the supposed doctor then saying that we would meet again later. A few days later, after I had already left the hospital, I was talking to my parents, and I said that the doctor in the white coat who visited me that day was really nice and that I should invite him for ice cream, but they were quite confused and asked me what this doctor looked like. I described the guy, and even someone my age at the time could tell that they both froze, because apparently the only doctor in the pediatric ICU, intensive care unit, was an elderly Japanese man, and nobody there wore a white coat for biosafety reasons. In other words, at no point while I was there was a young, Caucasian doctor in a white coat working in the ICU. To this day I'm terrified when I remember because I have no idea, and probably never will, who, or what, this guy was, especially with what he said about us meeting again. Of all the possibilities, I really hope it was just a hallucination because I was in such bad shape. I have been a nurse for 23 years and have worked in several facilities now, especially because I was a travel nurse during the pandemic. As you may imagine, hospitals are the setting for the extremes of life and death, the extremes of human emotion. There are moments of intense joy and moments of intense pain. There is suffering, and there is healing. I have witnessed all of this in my career. If you have any inclination to believe in the paranormal, then you understand that a hospital is the ideal setting for unexplained events. Most hospitals I have worked in harbor rumors of paranormal events and weird things on security cameras. It's pretty commonplace stuff, so generally we only discuss it if something particularly creepy happens. The hospital where I worked for the first 10 years of my career was remarkably active in this regard. In the span of my 10-year career there, I witnessed way more stuff than I cared to, way more stuff than I have ever seen anywhere else. During my tenure at this facility, cardiac monitors would suddenly turn on by themselves when rooms were unoccupied. Patients would report seeing angels, demons, and children, mostly children, though. A cross shot off a wall in my patient's room. A colleague and I witnessed a crash cart moving all by itself. A vacant floor was rumored to be haunted, and after sleeping there one night because of a snowstorm, I understood why, as well as several other bizarre events. It was an old, large hospital in a medium-sized Midwestern city. Nothing terribly remarkable about it, the hospital or the city. After moving on to other places of employment, I realize now that this hospital had a particularly dark atmosphere, one that was almost oppressive. There I witnessed some of the worst crimes against humanity I have ever seen or heard of, and it was a generally sad and scary place to work. 2 of my colleagues were stabbed while we were working. I unfortunately witnessed both. Patients were particularly violent here, and I was attacked more times than I can count. An employee ended themselves by jumping off the 12-story main tower. Now that I work and live 2,000 miles from there, I realize how dark this place really was. It's nice to have moved on to greener pastures. Something I haven't told anyone about this. There's this hospital that is haunted but no longer a hospital. It's a home for seniors. Shocking, I know, lol. This place is called Linda Vista in Boyle Heights. It was 2012. It was a Friday night. My friends and I had just finished DJing a house party, and we decided to hang out in the park. Across the street from the park was the hospital Linda Vista. A security guard was monitoring the area, but secretly, he charged $10 for entry and a tour, so I was the only one who went inside, probably because I was the most daring. Anyways, I went in, and all of a sudden it felt cold, and it had a weird smell. I don't know how to describe it, but it was awful. I started walking around. It was pitch black, so I had to use the flashlight from my phone. It was so quiet that if you dropped a pin, you could hear it. Nothing really happened, and I didn't hear anything while I was in there. It was just really creepy, and I had a terrible feeling. It wasn't until I returned home that everything began to unravel. The next day at night, around 9 p.m., I was in my room on Facebook chatting with some friends. Mom and Dad were working, and my little brother was already asleep. I heard dishes in the kitchen, like someone was putting dishes away. I thought it was my little brother, but he was asleep. I went to go check, and as soon as I started getting closer, the noise stopped. I froze, unable to move because I was scared. I thought I was tripping, but I wasn't. I went back to my room, and as soon as I walked in, it got really cold. I didn't think anything of it until it was like 2 a.m. I was still up talking to friends on Facebook. Next to my room, at the far end of the house, was another room, a small room that just had a bed in there. That door always remained locked because no one used it except if visitors came. So at 2 a.m., I heard knocking from the room. As soon as I got closer, it knocked again. I knew not to open that door because I could have let something in. So the knock stopped, and I'm not kidding when I say that when I sat back down in my chair, someone from that room yelled, "Open the door," in a woman's voice. The voice was raspy and sounded evil. It was so loud that it could have woken everyone up, but I was the only one awake. I ran to the living room and just slept there. I prayed and told whatever was in that room to go away, and I apologized if I had disturbed it when I went inside that hospital. Never again did I hear or feel anything in that house. Never again did I go inside that hospital. To this day, I haven't told anyone about this. That room remained mysterious. We don't live there anymore, so that's that, lol. Followed by ghost at Children's Hospital. Everyone in healthcare has a few stories, I certainly do. This is probably my most physical encounter. This happened years ago. I was a junior nurse working in the emergency department of a children's hospital. Late one night, I was transferring a patient to the wards. The ED was in a new building, joined to the old hospital by a long, closed-in footbridge. It was a normal night shift. I was tired, sleep deprived, and running off caffeine and nicotine. I was pushing the patient in a wheelchair, and the child's mom was walking beside me, chatting away and making awkward small talk. As we reached the older part of the hospital, I spotted a red balloon floating at about 6 feet off the ground, however not floating any higher. I thought, hope the recipient is still alive. Dark humor, I guess. It began to spin, I assumed from the fireproof doors opening. However, that assumption left me when it started to follow us, bobbing away as if it was being pulled by something, a child. We continued to walk towards the ward. My patient and their mom didn't seem to notice the red balloon following us. It kept its distance, maybe about 7 to 8 meters away. I kept half an eye on it until we got to the door of the ward. The balloon had followed us at least 60-ish meters down the corridor. While scanning into the ward, the balloon caught up to us and split off to the right, settling above a row of seats. Had this kid decided to have a seat and take a break? After exiting the ward, it was still there, floating as if whoever was holding it was still here. I felt watched, and all of the midnight ghost stories I had been told suddenly entered my consciousness all at once. You best believe I absolutely booked it back to the emergency department. I asked other nurses to do the transfers for the rest of the night. Anyway, that's probably the most obvious encounter I've had with the paranormal, and one I certainly enjoy pulling out to scare new coworkers, all in good fun, of course. The hospital and the ghost. I worked security at a small facility. Formerly a full-service hospital, it was now mostly an outpatient clinic, and the only overnight guests were the residents of the secure psyche wing and the patients in the sleep studies wing, aka the sleep lab. On the weekends, the place was deserted except for the psyche wing. Being in the psyche wing was strange/creepy/scary because of all the details mentioned in all the other stories here. Being in the sleep lab was strange/creepy/scary because it was on the other side of the hospital, as far from anybody else as you could be, isolated in its wing, dimly lit, and with some serious soundproofing in the walls. Furthermore, legend had it that back when the facility was a full-service hospital, the morgue was located there, so the ghosts of everyone who had ever died at that hospital were concentrated in that area. If you were in the sleep lab by yourself, it was said, the ghosts would talk to you. Nobody seriously believed this, of course, but if an IT technician was called in to repair equipment or if housekeeping needed to clean the area on a weekend, security would be called to check the area and might even be asked to stay so they wouldn't have to be there alone. One quiet weekend, I was making my rounds through this facility. I passed through the secure psych wing, and everything was secure. Most of the patients were hanging out in the day room chatting with each other. As I walked past that room, I noticed a patient with a loud, clear, deep bass voice. It really stood out because most of the patients were female. I continued on, checking the rest of the facility, and I eventually came to the sleep lab. When I checked inside, I met up with one of the housekeepers. This particular housekeeper was one who had laughed along with me about people who couldn't work in that area without a security escort, so I was surprised at her words. "I was just about to call you. There's a ghost in here. I can hear him talking." I assured her there was no such thing as ghosts and checked the whole wing to show her we were alone. I was about to tell her how crazy she was when I realized that I was also hearing someone talking. It was quiet, but it was definitely a human voice. Really a ghost? As I listened closely, I realized it was the same clear, deep, bass voice that I had heard in the psyche unit. Oh, crap. A mental patient had gotten out of the secure area and was in the sleep lab with us. Based on the sound of the voice, the patient appeared to be quite large. I tried to get the housekeeper to leave the wing, or at least lock herself in an office, but she wasn't letting me out of her sight. Again, I checked every room in the wing and found no one. When we stopped moving around and kept quiet, however, we could still hear the voice. Again, I checked every room, this time stopping every few steps to listen for the voice. I finally found the source of the voice in the monitoring room, where they had video and sound from every patient's sleep room. The staff had left the television on in one of the patient's sleep rooms. The television audio played out of the same device that doubled as a nurse call button attached to the bed. This device had been left sitting on the headboard of the bed, very near the video camera with which the staff would monitor the patient sleeping all night. The microphone on the camera was picking up the very quiet TV audio, which was playing through a speaker in the monitoring room at a much louder volume. However, it was still so quiet that it could only be heard if someone was actively listening for it. The show was some kind of interview show, and the host had a very loud, clear, deep, bass voice. We turned off the TV, and everything was quiet after that, except that from then on this housekeeper joined the group that always asked for a security escort when she had to clean that wing over the weekend. An experience I had a couple of years ago in a hospital. I woke up in bed, and next to me I could see a man lying next to me with no distinctive facial features but brown/dark hair. He got up and moved to the side of the bed and sat in front of me. He said to me, "You are going to die soon." I asked, "When?" But he didn't respond. I got up and locked myself in the bathroom, which was pretty close to my bed. I've still never figured out what they meant or who they were. I wasn't on any medication to bring on any hallucinations, and nothing like this has happened before or since. My experience at the hospital. I have to get this off my chest. So last month, February 2021, I was hospitalized with an infection in my right lung. After 3 days of observation by the surgeon and his staff, they informed me I needed to have surgery to remove the infection. It was a Monday. I vaguely remember that they were injecting me with anesthesia via 4. I was in an observation room I shared with an 80-year-old man who was bedridden. After they left and closed the door, I was alone. My roommate was briefly sent to get a chest X-ray. I feel like I was having a minor panic attack because I was really nervous and anxious. Now, I'm not a religious person, even though I was raised Catholic, Spanish Baptist, Protestant, and Lutheran. I stopped going to church a long time ago, but I believe in being kind and respectful to others, helping those in need, and giving to charity. While they were alone, I did say a brief prayer while I was alone, asking for guidance and safe passage through this procedure. After I was finished, I lay there alone with my thoughts to myself and occasionally sent text messages to family. I remember looking up and seeing someone, or something in the shape of a person, looking at me from the far side of my bed. I looked at it and didn't say anything, and it didn't say anything to me. I couldn't make out the face, but I got this sense that they were reassuring me everything will be okay. It was as if they transferred their power/energy to me. I nodded to them, and I felt that they smiled and nodded back. I then rested. The next thing I remember is the medical staff waking me up 2 days later after the surgery and saying it went well. I don't remember going into surgery. I needed to get this off my chest because it has been on my mind since it happened. Has anyone experienced something similar? I clean a hospital at night. For context, I got this job like 5-ish months ago. I'm in charge of cleaning all common areas, waiting rooms, hallways, office spaces, etc., of the 3-story non-inpatient hospital. I have a couple of coworkers who clean other areas, surgical centers, urgent care, pediatrics, etc., so I don't see them very often. Last month I had just gotten to the first floor and started my route with cleaning the bathrooms. The bathrooms face a hallway with a waiting room off to the left and some office spaces to the right. I had just finished the first bathroom and was heading into the second when I noticed what looked like a young woman peeking around a corner by the office spaces. I did a double take, and she wasn't there. I was genuinely confused, as none of my coworkers looked similar to her. She had an uncanny valley look, and she was in front of a completely white wall, so it's not like my brain could have seen a poster and humanized it. Either way, I kind of just ignored it and continued my route. Not even 10 minutes later, I was bending over to change a trash bag, facing the wall, when my shirt was completely pulled away from my back and dropped. I spun around hoping it was one of my coworkers playing a joke, but nobody was there. I was super freaked out, kind of yelled, "I didn't say you could touch me," finished my job, and left. I haven't had anything even close happen to me again. No clue what it was, but it was creepy as hell. A ghostly nurse that only men can see. When I was 13 years old, my aunt told me a story that became very famous in the city because several people had similar experiences in that hospital. During their night shifts at the hospital, several men said they had seen a nurse in the parking lot. She would be there 1 second and gone the next. She was very noticeable because she had long, reddish, curly hair that reached her waist and a very beautiful figure. Only men could see her. No one knew who that nurse was. Some patients said she would lie down next to them while they slept in the hospital, and some members of the service staff said they had seen her walking through the hallways. My aunt said she believed it was just a rumor spreading around and that it wasn't true, because she had worked there for 20 years. She said it was hard for her to believe that suddenly a ghost nurse would appear wandering around the hospital and that only men could see her, until one day something happened involving her husband. Her husband is a police officer, and he was admitted to the hospital because he had been shot. They operated on him, and my aunt was the one taking care of him. A few days later, my aunt had to go check on another patient and told her husband to try to get some sleep. He fell asleep, and when my aunt came back later, she saw him lying very close to the edge of the bed. She touched his shoulder so he would move toward the center, and he told her, "Come back, lie down, and hug me again." My aunt said, "What do you mean hug you again?" He looked confused and said, "I thought you had gotten up to go to the bathroom, so it wasn't you who was lying next to me hugging me?" She told him that maybe he was imagining things because of the medication. He then asked, "Then who is in the bathroom?" The bathroom light was on, and the door was closed. Suddenly, they heard the bathroom sink faucet turn on. My aunt walked over, knocked on the door, and shouted, but no one answered. She slowly opened the door. No one was there, and the sink was completely dry. At that moment, she remembered that several patients had asked other nurses who the red-haired nurse was who had lain down next to them. She told me that in her entire life she had never felt such an icy cold run through her skin. After that, she switched to the morning shift. She never found out who that nurse was or why she only appeared to men. But she never wanted to find out either. Hospital ghosts. I work for elder care communities. I'm in and out of different buildings all day long, so I don't have an office. Basically, I perch myself on my laptop to do my housekeeping anywhere where there is room. I've only held this current position for about a month and a half. I have one building that's an old hospital. It was built in 1950. It's a small building, only one floor. Although it has been extensively updated, it still has an MCM feel to it. Also, my administrator has found some old hospital odds and ends in the basement as well as some old signage from when the hospital was dedicated. It's on display in the building. It's actually kind of cool, as even one of our residents was a doctor in the hospital. It definitely creates a vintage vibe. In this building, my office is the old chapel. It's a small, beautiful room with stained glass windows. It is right off of the main lobby, where there is a TV that's usually playing for the residents to watch. Last week, while doing my paperwork, I thought I heard someone crying. I almost stuck my head out the door when I heard my administrator walk by with one of the CNAs. I recognized their voices. They were laughing about something, so I knew there was no one crying in the hallway. If there was a problem, someone would have addressed it. The building administrator fully dedicates herself to her residents. Also, it didn't seem as though it was coming from the television. About 10 minutes later, I got up to use the bathroom. There was a resident watching an old western in the lobby, not the kind of programming that would have a crying scene. I still was very unsure but just chalked it up to something on the TV. Yesterday I was in the chapel doing paperwork. Again, I started to hear crying. This time, I really listened to it. The lobby TV was on, but its sound didn't sync with the crying. They were overlapping. I'm now convinced what I've experienced in the chapel is some kind of residual haunting from when the building was a hospital. Weird happenings at the local hospital. Okay, so first off, my best friend and I work at a hospital together. We work overnight security, and I'm a phlebotomist. He told me this story at a barbecue we had. This is the weirdest story I've heard from the hospital. The way our pediatric unit works, they tend to close at night. We mostly see infusion patients on that floor, not many overnights. The door into the unit is magnetically locked at all times, and to get in you have to either 1. Scan your badge. 2. Ring the bell for entry via the nurse's station. It was maybe 3 a.m., and my friend was in the security room when all of a sudden the alarm that alerts security to a possible forced entry into pediatrics went off. My buddy, we will call him A, and 3 other officers go up to the floor to find nothing, so they think it was a fluke with the system. About an hour later, A is out for a smoke and gets a call about the PED's alarm again. Thinking it's BS, security sends him and 1 other person up there to check it out. They find the door wide open. This alone freaks them out. They go around the floor double checking and find every door wide open. So fully freaked out, they close all the important doorways, magnetic seals, and section doors. When they get downstairs, they immediately check the cameras and see 3 doors, including the pediatric main door, along with a few other non-magnetic doors, open at the same time. I've had a couple of creepy situations there, but nothing like this story. Sorry the story is anticlimactic, I just felt like you guys would enjoy the creep factor. Haunted Hospital Edmonton. There is an old abandoned hospital. In Edmonton, it's called Charles Camsell Hospital, and this happened to me, my older brother, I'll call him Omar, and a couple of our friends. At the time, I was 18 years old, and on that fall night, my friends and I had gone ghost hunting, first visiting a cemetery for about an hour, when one of our friends mentioned a nearby hospital that was reported to be very haunted. Since we were not experiencing anything at the cemetery, we decided to go to the hospital instead, saying, sure, why not? It was still early, it was like 1:30 a.m. So we made our way to the hospital. My brother Omar drove there, and it was about 5 minutes away. We pulled up to this hospital, and it was fenced off with no trespassing signs posted all over. I do not condone trespassing anywhere, please ensure you obtain proper permission before conducting any ghost hunts, but at that time, we were young and foolish. When we arrived, we walked along the fence to see if we could get in. That's when we heard some voices coming from the front entrance of the hospital, so we ducked down and silenced our voices. Security was escorting a group of teens about our age out of the hospital. I imagine that the hospital has experienced many incidents with vandals and thrill-seeking teens, which is why they have security patrolling the area and checking inside. It was 2 security guards escorting them out, and they walked them back to their vehicle. We thought this was a great opportunity to get in, no security for a while, we thought, and an open space not 5 feet from us. So we quickly went through the small hole and went in. This place was spooky, I'll tell you, and dark. We had flashlights, obviously, and we headed through the main entrance and decided to go through the hospital floor by floor, starting from the basement. We went through with nothing happening, and it was pretty much a bust, with locked doors to some areas, and we were sure security would be coming around again soon. But before we left, Omar suggested we try 1 more floor up, and we agreed to it. Why the hell not, right? So we went up, and Omar didn't have a flashlight. It was dark and hard to see, but with the city lights and the moon illuminating inside a little, it was somewhat possible to walk around without a flashlight. He took the lead, being the oldest in the group. We followed behind with our flashlights when we all heard giggling. It was faint, but we all heard it. We stood still to see if we could hear it again. We all heard it again, the same giggle, but it was more audible. It had to be from a child, and we were getting a little freaked out when all of a sudden I saw Omar dart straight down the hall. I ran behind him, and I asked him, Omar, what the hell? And he said, I saw someone at the end of the hallway. I told him to slow down. For some reason I felt uncomfortable about this situation. I don't know what it was, but something wasn't right. Omar was wearing a hoodie that night, lucky for him. I caught up to him, and I grabbed him by the hoodie and pulled him back, dropping him to the floor because I had seen something in front of him that he must not have seen for whatever reason. Dude, what gives? He yelled at me, and I replied, Omar, look, as I shone the flashlight about 2 feet in front of him, revealing a large hole in the middle of the cross-section that led to other corridors. He stood up, and as we approached the edge, we could see that it led directly to the basement, which was several floors above us. Now I know it was the basement because it was completely flooded at the time, and I threw a stone or a piece of cement down the hole just to see how far down it went, and sure enough, we heard a splash at the end. After the stone hit the water, Omar and I heard a giggle again, and we looked up from the hole, and sure enough, on the other side of this massive hole was what I would say looked to be the figure of a little girl, and just as quickly as she was there, she was gone, just gone again. I had my flashlight, and I shone it in the direction of the little girl, but there was nothing, just the corridor with some hospital beds, that's it. If you have any comments about whether this incident was intended to harm my brother, please leave a comment. I think he might not be here today, or maybe he would be, but he could have been severely injured in the fall. I had a friend who was a medic in the Army. He had to do rotations in Womack Army Hospital at Fort Bragg. One day he was told to go down to the storage rooms in the basement and put some stuff away. Right across from the storage rooms was the morgue. No one was down there, as it was 7 p.m. As he was working the key in a lock, he heard something and turned around to find a woman in a hospital gown standing a few feet away. He was surprised, and she asked where she was. He turned to look for 2 seconds at the room number he was getting into. When he turned back, she was gone. He set the stuff he was holding and quickly left the area. He reported what happened and was told not to go back the rest of the shift. I ran into him soon after the incident, and he was pretty unsettled. Someone came home from the hospital with us. This occurred over 20 years ago but is still fresh in my mind. My son was born early at 32 weeks. We were lucky, and he had few issues, and we were able to bring him home a month after he was born. He came home on oxygen and caffeine due to bradycardia. Once we were home, strange things began to happen. The cat refused to go in his room. And before he was born, I was forever removing said cat from his room. Our dog would sit at the bottom of the stairs and tilt his head as if he were listening to something. I would be changing his diaper and start talking as I thought his dad just came into the room, only to turn and find out I was alone. A friend gave him a peekaboo Big Bird toy that would say peekaboo when you covered and then uncovered its eyes. This toy would go off all the time. Even after I placed the toy into a box in the closet, it continued to go off. I often felt I was not alone in that house. My parents had given us an AngelCare baby monitor as a gift. This had a pad that was placed under the mattress, and an alarm would sound if it did not detect any movement after a certain amount of time. As our son was tiny, only 5 pounds when he came home, this alarm would often go off. I would wake up, walk into his room, turn it off, and check on him. He was always fine. And I always felt it was only because he was so tiny that the pad didn't pick up his breathing. During this time, I often dreamed of a woman I would find in his room. I never saw her directly but would dream I saw the shadow of a woman with long hair standing and reaching into his crib. The dreams never scared me, but I did find them very odd but comforting at the same time. I can't remember how long he had been home, but it was at least a month. He was still on oxygen, and he was still on caffeine. Our bed was to the left of our bedroom door, and I slept on the right-hand side next to the door, and my husband slept on the left-hand side. I was asleep and was woken up by being shaken roughly on the door side of the bed. I woke up, looked over at my husband, and said, "Why are you shaking me?" Only to realize that he was completely asleep and could not have shaken me from his side of the bed. I immediately jumped up and ran to my son's room. I flipped the light on, something I had never done to this point, and heard a gasp from the crib. Often when babies spontaneously stop breathing, you just need to startle them to begin again. I truly believed that he had stopped breathing, and my turning on the light startled him into breathing again. After this episode, the dreams and strange occurrences with the pets and toys continued. This continued until my son stopped taking oxygen and caffeine. Once that happened, the odd occurrences stopped. The pets stopped acting weird, and the Big Bird toy never went off on its own again. I believed that someone came home with him to keep him safe. The feeling I got from my dreams was that it was a young woman, maybe early to mid-20s and indigenous. I'm Canadian. I will always be grateful for them watching over him and shaking me awake that night so I could startle my son into breathing again. My hospital has a ghost. I cannot believe I am saying this, but there's a ghost in my hospital. 2 patients passed away nearby in the intensive care unit. After the deaths, I heard a female voice sobbing. This went on for about 5 minutes, and then she just let out a horrible scream. I felt bad for her, but what happened next was downright horrifying. I saw this bright orange ball in my room. It was glowing. It hovered above me, and while it was present, I felt an absolute chill. I was freezing. This lasted for what I'm estimating to be about 3 minutes. Occasional purple sparks would come out of the orange glowing ball. I didn't get shocked, but seeing those sparks creeped me out. I hate electricity because of the 3 times years ago when they had to use the paddles on me. Finally, that orange glowing ball slowly exited the room. At that point, it was all over. I was no longer cold. I sure didn't sleep anymore though. I've never dealt with ghosts before, so what ended up happening last night, for Pete's sake? I don't know how to describe it. They better discharge me before anything else happens. One of the nights in a children's hospital. I am not a believer in ghosts/spirits, but I really wish they existed. What I am going to talk about here is my personal experience, and it was not made up. I was doing night on calls in a state children's hospital. It just went past midnight, and I was going back to the theater to check how soon the case on the table would finish so that I could anticipate when I would get mine done. I got into the lift from the ground floor and pressed level 4, where the theater was. Just as the door was about to completely close, it opened up again, as if someone put a hand in the gap to stop it. No one was there. I looked out to find out if someone was pushing the button in the lobby, but there was no one. Well, this kind of thing could happen at times, I thought. The lift went up, then stopped at level 3, but nobody pressed the button for that level. No one walked in. The door closed again, and the lift brought me to level 4. I got out and felt it was quite a weird experience. Then this came to my mind. It could be a ghost of a child who was lingering in the hospital who just shared the lift with me, or just a malfunction of the lift on that night, whichever you choose to believe. I experienced a lot of very odd things at my hospital job. I held a position in the food services department, which required me to travel throughout the building to manage logistics and distribute floor stock to all 8 floors. The kitchen/food services area itself was in the basement and shared a wall, and refrigeration services/infrastructure, with a morgue. I worked overnight and in the early morning quite frequently and was often the only person in my area for hours at a time. I lost count of the times I was in the supply room across the hall from the morgue, heard footsteps coming up behind me, or felt someone tapping me on my shoulder, only to turn around and find absolutely no living soul in sight. And this was an area with excellent lighting and long hallways where one could see/hear someone coming from quite a distance. Sometimes the door would open as I was doing inventory or whatever, and I would be annoyed, thinking one of the cafe employees needed something, and would stop what I was doing to whip my head around and see absolutely nothing. It happened so often I developed a theory that some poor, newly dead soul had wandered from the morgue, possibly unaware they were not alive, and was looking for an exit or someone to help them. Just a thought, but who knows? While making deliveries upstairs, especially to the ICU area, I often passed rooms where I saw someone sitting on the edge of a bed or staring out a window, but when I walked back by a moment later, I would find the room completely empty, the hallway deserted, and the en-suite bathroom dark and vacant. The nurses definitely had their stories they would whisper about. I can only imagine. Plenty of other random weird things would happen, but I have already left this super long comment lol. Hospitals are transitional spaces between life and death. So much intense emotion is imprinted on these spaces. I have no idea what a ghost actually is, but I know that our own personal energy, very recently liberated from a dying body, has to go somewhere, and I can see it gathering in spaces like a hospital before dissipating and going wherever it goes. This is particularly true when someone passes away unexpectedly or through a traumatic experience. I just hope it doesn't get trapped in a place like that indefinitely. My hospital job. I work in a hospital. This hospital isn't in a big city, the town is actually quite small. Most of the people that live here are older and are mainly here to enjoy the peace and quiet until it's their time to move on. My first few nights working here were normal. I clocked in and was told what room I was going to be in. I went to that room and watched a sleeping patient for 12 hours while I played games on my phone. I love this job. You get paid to watch movies or play games on your phone. Obviously, your primary responsibility is to monitor the patient and ensure their well-being, but this task can become effortless when the patient remains asleep throughout. In any case, that is typically how most of my nights unfolded. There was nothing special about this night. Just another regular night. I clocked in, walked to the room I was asked to watch, and sat down. I put my headphones in and turned on some scary YouTube because what's better than that? My patient was drowsy. It was probably due to the medication they had been prescribed. My patient asked me if I heard that. I looked around the room with my headphones off. I turned and said no. My patient was scared. Their face was filled with fright. I asked him what he heard, and he said, "You don't hear the tapping on the window?" "No." I answered. "Mind you, we are on the 2nd floor. There's no way they heard anything." Eventually the nurse came in, sedated them, and the patient fell asleep. This happened every single night with my patient. I assumed they were just going a little crazy due to being here for far too long. Same thing. They would ask me if I could hear it, I would say no, and they would be given meds to go to sleep. Eventually my patient passed away. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, once again, this town is where most people come to die. It was several days later until I got called in again, saying we had another patient and I was needed. Okay, pretty normal. My patient was in the hospital because it was their time to go, and their family couldn't always meet their needs. Really sad, honestly. You do see this a lot, the kids of the patient can't be taking care of them all the time, so they let them die in the hospital. This was going to be their first night in the hospital. My patient was talking a lot and was a bit confused, which I'm going to assume is dementia. This is a common occurrence among patients with dementia. She would tell me stories about her childhood, then think she was at home and would ask me to turn off the light. Just a lot of randomness. Eventually she got tired, and I helped tuck her in and get her comfortable. She was a very nice old lady. Around 2 a.m. she randomly woke up. She sat up, which I had not seen her do, She had been lying the whole time she was here because her body was just really weak. She looked around the room and pointed at the window and asked, "What is that?" I looked, and I didn't see anything. I looked at her and said, "What are you seeing?" More curious than anything. "Remind you she has dementia. He's tapping, asking me to open the window." She looked so frightened and ready to leave. Eventually my patient started to get agitated and was trying to leave while she had been given a sleeping pill. This means she is unable to walk. If she does, she can hurt herself. The nurse had to come in the room and sedate her to put her back to sleep. That morning she passed away. The hospital said it was old age. I remember talking to the nurse, and she seemed super weird about it. But who knows? Maybe she doesn't see people dying that often. Which is where I'm at now. All I can do is keep watching my patients and hope they don't see the thing they're so sure they'll see. I mean, two completely different patients seeing the same thing seems a little odd to me. Don't you think? I work at a hospital, with tunnels connecting the old psych ward and current crematory. They also dissect the bodies for the med students. I'm a little disappointed so far. I'm in some aesthetically freaky areas seen only by badge-approved staff. We also cremate deceased kids for free, which is creepy when you say it out loud, but it's a service they offer with good intention. I have seen nothing unusual. Absolutely nothing. It's a hospital with an extensive history, since the early 1900s, around 1908. I often find myself in the hospital. I work in research, not in the crematory, passing through several different buildings. Some are new, while most are old, and even the newer buildings were constructed over older ones. I'm skeptical but open-minded, and I thought for sure that if ghosts exist, they will 100% exist where I work. I see people who were alive hours before being wheeled to the freezer to be dissected, cremated, or stored to be picked up by funeral homes. The basement of this place is dimly lit and as creepy as a horror movie, with electromagnetic fields at extremely high levels due to the experimental 12 Tesla MRI machine and 7 Tesla machines. Normal high-intensity MRI ranges are around 3 Tesla. These machines are extraordinary, yet still, nothing occurs. Using a milligauss detector app, you will get nothing but red, as it is well above the range of what a phone can read. I'm disappointed, to say the least. It has the history, the electromagnetic atmosphere, the tragic stories being wheeled through daily, the Spanish flu epidemic dead were even held there, the creepy atmosphere, the eerie flickering lights in the basements that go down several levels, and nothing unusual to be experienced. My dad's strange encounter in the hospital. I live in Madagascar, that island to the east of Africa. A lot of people here still believe in magic, sorcery, and all that stuff, despite being a big Christian country. My dad passed away in 2002, and he lived and experienced a lot of things in his life. He was a Christian and didn't believe in witchcraft and magic stuff, although he experienced a very strange thing back in the 80s. My mom and an aunt did confirm that story. In 1985, before I was even born, my dad caught pneumonia and was rushed to the hospital. My mom and an auntie were there to look for him, buying medics, etc. My uncle, that aunt's husband, knew things about black magic and traditional Malagasy witchcraft. When he once visited my dad on the 4th or 5th day in the hospital, he told him something. He gave him a piece of ginger and asked him to keep it in his hand for the next 2 days. My dad asked why, and my uncle told him that on the next 2 days, an evil person, who wanted to hurt him or even worse, would come to visit him in his hospital room. Holding that piece of ginger will keep the evil person away. My dad didn't believe a single word of what he said, but mom insisted on doing it because she knew my uncle was really serious about it. So my dad kept the ginger in his hand for 2 days. The very next day, while he and my mom were in the room, someone knocked at the door. My mom opened it, and one of my dad's co-workers and friends was there with some flowers. My mom told him to enter, but the guy stayed right there and then said that finally he won't enter the room. My dad saw him and told him to enter, but he was standing in the threshold, not moving. And then he turned back and went away quickly without saying goodbye. Later, when my dad was back to work, his co-worker and friend was not working with him anymore, and my dad never saw him again. I work in a busy perioperative department. There is a charge nurse that I work with who has been a nurse for over 50 years, we will call her Gail. Gail is incredible, the mama of the unit. Everyone at this hospital knows her and loves her. She doesn't take shit from anyone but also has this kind and approachable demeanor. She is an amazing resource if you want to know anything about anything. Anyway, I respect her immensely. Gail always opens the unit early in the morning. She has a very set routine and arrives about 30 minutes before the first shift even starts so that she can take her time writing out the schedule and tidying up the unit. So Gail arrived at the hospital early one morning a few years ago and parked in the large parking garage across the street. The employee garage is on the backside of the hospital, so it's easiest to enter through the supply loading entrance. This leads right into the basement of the hospital, and you can choose multiple routes to make your way to various elevators or staircases. The most direct route to our surgical area is to follow a very long hallway in the basement to the furthest elevator and then head up the stairs 2 floors, which will lead you directly to the unit. Not many employees go that route because the majority of staff work on inpatient units that are more centralized and not at the far end like surgery is. Gail is making her way down the long hallway, and it's pretty quiet, especially at 5:30 a.m. But on this morning she sees a doctor that she has known for years. A well-respected cardiologist, Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith had been diagnosed with cancer a few years prior and had been in and out of the hospital for treatment and admissions during times of illness. Gail was so happy to see him because it had been a few months. And he looked incredible, his treatments must have been working. As they passed each other, she said, "Dr. Smith, it's so good to see you. You look fantastic." Dr. Smith gave Gail a huge smile and said, "Gail, I feel better than I have in years, it's so nice to see you." Gail continued down the hall and up the stairs to the unit. She started preparing the schedule for the day, and surgeons started trickling in to input orders and review patient charts. Gail noticed another cardiologist who had also worked there for a very long time. She exclaimed, "Dr. Allen, I just saw Dr. Smith as I came in this morning. He looks amazing, I am so glad that he's responding to treatment." Dr. Allen was silent and had a strange look on his face. He walked over to Gail and put his hand on her shoulder. He said, "Gail, Dr. Smith passed away last night on 6 South, the cancer unit." Gail thought he was kidding, she insisted that she had just seen him. But Dr. Allen assured her that Dr. Smith had passed and was currently down in the morgue. In the basement. The entrance to the morgue is the only door in the middle of that long hallway that leads to the stairs. Gail fell silent as she realized she had seen him walking past her as she approached the morgue entrance. He was headed toward the exit. She told Dr. Allen that she must have been mistaken as not to appear crazy. But she knew what she saw. She was pretty shaken up when we arrived for our shifts, and after a few hours, she quietly told some of us what had happened. She stopped walking that direction and took the long route away from the morgue from then on. She retired last year, and we all miss her dearly. Every time I walk down that hallway, I get shivers as I pass the morgue. Hospital Ghost. Hi everyone. I'm hoping to get some insight into a series of unsettling experiences I've had at a hospital over the past few months. Here's a summary of what's been happening. Encounter 1, January. While staying at the hospital for a month with my sick child, I experienced several strange events. A sound machine fell off a side table, and a light flickered erratically, but I was the only one who witnessed these occurrences. However, during a time when doctors and nurses were updating us on my daughter's condition, magnets flew across the room seemingly on their own. The staff saw this happen but seemed puzzled and chose to ignore it. Encounter 2, last month, while sleeping at home, I felt a hand run down my arm and then a poke on my back. My husband was asleep beside me. I initially thought it was just nerves from sleeping awkwardly, but after falling asleep again, I was abruptly woken by a loud "Mom," yet there was no one around when I looked. Encounter 3, yesterday, during a recent hospital visit for a routine checkup, my daughter was asleep during her chemo session. While I was talking to a nurse and looking at photos on the wall, I felt a distinct tug on my sweater. I turned around, expecting to see someone, but no one was there. The tugging happened 2 more times. I spoke with one of the nurses, and she said, "Trust me, I believe you." She called the child life specialist over, and she said, "Come with me, I want to show you something." She guided me to a door and had me examine the door. "See, it doesn't lock, there is no lock. There is no way for this door to catch on anything, it just swings open. Sometimes when we try to open the door, it won't open for a while." I looked for any possible explanation, and I couldn't find one. Then she called over another nurse, and she verified this story. Apparently there is a ghost that likes to play pranks. I want to know if anyone has had similar experiences or if they have any theories as to why I might be having these encounters. Any insights or similar experiences would be greatly appreciated. Thanks in advance. Paranormal Hospital Elevator. Years ago, I worked in nutritional services for a local hospital, and the legend was that people close to the end would say things like, "Where did that little girl go? And there was just a little girl in here just now." The stories were the stuff of legend among the hospital staff, doctors, nurses, and support staff. I had worked there for years and never experienced anything supernatural or that couldn't logically be explained. So part of our job was to take food carts up to the floor levels and deliver trays to the patients. Our kitchen was located at the basement level, and we had to lock the elevator for meal service by using a key set to position it. Once the elevator is locked for service, the only way to open and close the doors is to hold down either the open or close button all the way down until the elevator doors complete the action. However, if you release the button beforehand, the elevator doors would just resume opening back up, much like a garage door would if there was something caught in the sensor. Also, some of the floors would allow the elevator to open to either the east or west wing by pushing down and holding the appropriate button. My main point being that you would have to physically hold the button down to completely open and close the doors for the duration of the action. One evening, while taking the food cart back to the elevator, the doors started to close, and as soon as I was near enough, they started to open again. The floor I was on didn't open to the adjacent wing, and no one exited the elevator. It shook me because there is no way to open and close that elevator door unless you hold down the button, and the elevator was empty. I had asked the maintenance staff that services the elevator if there was a mechanical explanation for what happened, and they confirmed my experience that there was no physical reason for the malfunction. The old Bamsey Hospital and its supposed ghosts. I always found these stories interesting and riveting to hear, but I never believed that anyone could have a genuine experience with a ghost. I used to work security at the old hospital, Old Bamsey, also a historical site if you're interested, and it was turned into office buildings. When I first started working there, people always told me that the part of the building that I would spend most of my time in, which apparently used to be the morgue, was haunted, but skeptically, I never thought it was true. My job was to make sure only people with the right ID were able to come into the building. This story takes place in the wee hours of the day, typically the overnight crew stays over, and these people are in a part of the building that you 99% of the time never see. I was doing my morning rounds, making sure no one was on that floor, ending with checking the restroom. It was totally empty, with no signs of use while we had been away. I had left, but just as I was about to go back to my office and the door had already closed behind me, I heard it slam again. Surprised, thinking that someone had walked by me without me noticing, I went back to see who it was. The bathroom was empty. Then as I was about to leave, thinking that maybe I had just made a mistake, the motion sensor toilet in one of the stalls flushed itself. I turned around to look further into the restroom, and still I was the only one inside. I leave to go back to my desk, thinking that maybe the toilet was faulty and trying to brush everything off as coincidence or something, when I start to hear a slight crackling, slight tick-tick, from my radio, and that never happens. Then I feel a cold chill up my spine, and this area only has 2 doors, neither of which I was next to. Then I hear my name, Prime Appland, being eerily whispered just around the corner. I ran to try and catch the person who was messing with me. That hallway dead ends, so I could easily catch them, but no one was there. My colleague radios down and calls me on the office line at this point, and at first I can barely hear him. His voice is low, the audio is garbled, and it doesn't even sound like his voice. He's got a very distinctive old man voice. The call clears up, and he's asking me if I'm okay. He stated that he was monitoring the cameras continuously and observed me moving about in a frantic manner throughout. I asked if he'd been watching the cameras long, and he said he always does because it's a scary building, it's still very dark out, and he always pays extra attention while I'm doing the rounds since I'm a somewhat petite female. He's a sweet old guy. He said he didn't see anyone else down there, no one had come in at any point, and he never saw the doors slam. I shared this story with some colleagues at work, and I learned that my main hub was formerly the morgue, where a few people had ended themselves in the maintenance basement directly below us. I had an unusual encounter in the hospital waiting room. I was alone in the waiting room listening to music, waiting for my mother to arrive so that we could go home. The waiting room is next to a staff-only corridor of some sort, and while I was waiting there I saw a bunch of nurses pushing an empty stretcher, and 2 or 5 minutes later they came back running with a patient covered with a blanket. I guessed he was dead. Shortly after this, approximately 20 seconds, my headphones crack and the music stops. I thought someone was calling me, on the phone, because the music stops automatically when someone calls me, but nobody was calling me, so I just turned the music back on. 1 second after doing this, I start feeling cold. Strong gusts of wind are right on my face and my hands, so obviously I start looking for the air conditioner, thinking, WTF are these people doing? It's so cold. On the side I was feeling the cold, there was no air conditioning, just walls, but the weird thing was, the wind didn't feel like the usual blow, it was like a targeted pressure, it didn't blend or extend. After freaking out a little bit, it just stopped. A weird experience indeed, I thought I should share it. Hospital encounter. I feel like hospitals should be full of ghosts and spirits just because it's a place full of people close to the other side. I've worked in a hospital for almost 7 years now, And I've seen life leave people's bodies and felt a presence or connection with them, but I've only had one experience that truly terrified me. I used to work nights. Thinking about a large dark hospital full of quiet sleeping people is kind of creepy, but I never felt that way. My job is to wake people up and draw their blood. I know I'm super popular at the hospital. There has always been a wing of the hospital that makes me uneasy. I'm an amazingly upbeat person. I love my job and the patients. However, as soon as I step onto that wing, a sense of unease overwhelms me, prompting me to scrutinize my surroundings and consider leaving. One morning around 03:00, I entered this wing to administer an injection to a patient, feeling queasy. I walk into the patient's room, not knocking because it's so late. The lights are all off, and I see someone standing in the far corner away from me. I'm immediately taken aback but quickly think it's a nurse hanging blood or something. I look at the figure and ask, "Do you need me to come back?" No response. It turns towards the corner and just stands there with its back to me. My whole body is on edge, and I have never felt so scared in my life. I was certain it was not a nurse. I backed out of the room and walked towards the nurse's station. I just lean against a wall trying to catch my breath. A nurse asks if I'm going to be sick. I had to go back into the patient's room and draw her blood. This time I turned on the lights before I even stepped in. Of course no one was there except for the sleeping old lady. I quickly drew her blood, trying to ignore the sinking feeling that someone was standing right behind me and watching me. I hate that wing, and that room will forever give me the tingles when I have to go in it. It's been years, but I won't forget it. When I was 17 years old, I was hired by a family member who managed a funeral home to remodel a bathroom and do other general maintenance around the very old building. Since there were clients and funerals coming in the daytime, I worked from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. I was alone during this time and a little bothered by all the dead hanging out in the place. Anyway, I pushed the fact that I was in a place with dead bodies out of my mind and showed up to work. The bathroom I was working on was directly across from the embalming room. There was only room for one body at a time in the morgue's dead body fridge, and the rest would be laid out on a couple of tables in the embalming room. Nobody bothered to warn me about the fact that these motherduckers talk. And by talk I mean groan, burp, whisper, and occasionally twitch. My first morning there, I was silently mudding drywall when I heard my first groan. My stomach dropped out, and fight or flight kicked in. I stood my ground and went over in my mind how what I heard come from the room was ducking impossible. It wasn't a loud groan, and I quickly convinced myself that I imagined it and went back to taping and mudding. A couple minutes later, something in the embalming room crashed to the floor. I was up and moving before the sound stopped echoing. The front door was 60 feet down the hallway from the bathroom I was working in. I sprinted towards the door, never even looking back. The windows were all covered by heavy curtains that blocked out almost all of the light, and since the sun wasn't up, there wasn't much anyway. I had passed the light switch on my way to the door and didn't want a chance going back to turn the lights on. I slammed into the heavy metal doors only to be stopped dead by the locks. I had been instructed to lock the doors while there in order to prevent anybody from coming in before business hours. By now, full panic had set in, and I had lost all my fine motor skills. Digging for the keys in my pockets took ages and only increased my panic. I knew that the dead lumbering after me down the hall had closed the distance to mere feet as I drew the keys from my pockets. I slammed the key into the door, missing the lock and jarring it loose from my stupid fumbling fingers. Recovering the keys from the floor after what seemed like a full minute of trying, I sprang back up and again jammed the key into the door. This time, the key found the lock, and I threw open the door. The soft pre-dawn light greeted me as I stumbled out into the parking lot. Behind me the door swung shut. I finally turned around, staring at the door, waiting to take on whatever horrors decided to follow me outside. Nothing happened. I walked over to my truck and opened the tailgate and sat down. I continued to stare at the closed door. At this point, I was experiencing a full-blown panic attack. As the adrenaline coursed through my body, my breathing became ragged, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. I fumbled a cigarette from my shirt pocket and lit it. As I smoked, my breathing came back under control, and adrenaline began to dump from my body. Even though I acknowledged the absurdity of my situation, I couldn't bring myself to go back into that building. At one point, I opened the door and surveyed the interior from outside. I didn't see anything. Still, I would not go in. I stayed outside wondering what I would tell my aunt when she came in at 9 a.m. Would she believe me? Would she fire me? Worse, would she tell the world of my cowardice? At 8 a.m., the mortician showed up. Having never met, he looked me over while walking to the front door. Finding it open, he looked back at me and asked me if I was the kid who had been hired. I said yes and introduced myself. He asked me how it was going. I didn't have an answer for him, so I just kind of stared blankly at him. Sensing that something was wrong, he asked me if everything was okay. After an eternity of awkward silence, I told him what I experienced. He looked at me and just nodded his head up and down in an unspoken affirmative. He then told me that he had brought in a man the night before at about 10 p.m. and said that the guy was dying. This raised the hair on the back of my neck. Dying, I said. I had thought they were supposed to be dead before they got here. He said that while the man most certainly wasn't alive, he was still dying. Dying, he said, takes a very long time. There is still life in a body after the brain stops and the soul leaves. Life is what finally completely removes us from the earth. There is life in the body that begins to break it down, that begins to truly take us out of this world. He said that is where he comes in. He was there that morning to stop the dying by stopping the life. He took me into the embalming room and showed me the body. He manipulated it this way and that, and while doing so, some of the post-mortem gases escaped from the body. It sounded like a whisper. I took a step back. The mortician looked at me and said, "It is only gases, son, caused by the life that brings us death." Not being an idiot, I understood what he was talking about and went back to work. Before I did, though, I looked around the room for whatever might have fallen and caused the sound of something crashing to the ground. I didn't see anything. I want to add that the mortician was a ducking weirdo who was eventually let go for reasons unknown to me. There was a lot of other weird shit that happened to me there. The sound of unknown objects falling became a somewhat common occurrence. I quickly stopped investigating them. One time while painting some of the unused upstairs rooms, I could not keep a door from closing behind me. I even propped it open with a full 5-gallon bucket of paint. That creeped me out quite a bit. I would see shadows moving out of the corners of my eyes and constantly hear strange noises. I never got used to dead people and tried to steer as clear of them as possible. I finished all the jobs I was presented with and learned to have a backbone and face my fears, but there was never a day that I wasn't terrified to be there. Even today, I won't do it again, and I have written in my will that I will not have a funeral in a funeral home after I die. I want to be cremated ASAP and scattered in a sunny spot on the south side of a mountain. I am a nurse. I work on an acute adult medicine unit. Due to the acuity of the patients, we often have deaths on the unit. We have found that the patients who are nearing the end of their time often speak of seeing or hearing young children laughing or seeing someone dressed in white visit them. Odd things happen on night shifts mostly. Lights turn off randomly down an unused hall, or doors slam out of the blue down the same hall, which is an old, creaky wing of the hospital. The nurse's break room has a picture hanging of the old CRN, aka charge nurse, who passed away as a patient on our unit. The break room has some eerie events happen during the night shift. Many nurses report experiencing night terrors, where they feel suffocated and unable to scream, yet they can see the other nurse napping during their break. Some describe having their hair pulled. One time we were napping in the break room on night shift, and we were awakened by loud knocking on the door. This isn't totally uncommon, as the other nurses on the ward sometimes knock to wake us up for the break switch. However, the other nurses were busy in a code at that moment, and no one else was around to have knocked. I know it doesn't seem that freaky, but that room gives me the creeps. Many nurses will skip their night break because that room freaks them out too much. I live in a hospital built in 1919. Hello everyone. As the title says, I live in an old hospital that turned into a home for elders, and after that, it became a place for elders that await death. I knew all of this before moving in, and it didn't bother me at first. But a few days after moving here, me and my girlfriend, started hearing strange noises from the kitchen, as if someone was touching kitchen appliances and the coffee maker. We both got pretty scared but went to bed. Those noises became more frequent and louder, and at one point, my girlfriend jumped out of bed, went to the kitchen, and said loudly, "Leave our home, you do not belong here. Leave our home, you do not belong here." And it got quiet for a couple of days. But only a few days. Those noises advanced and got closer to our bedroom, almost as if you could tell by the sound where it was. It got worse and worse, and one night while sleeping, I got this super eerie feeling in my body, just as if something warned me. I immediately woke up and sat up in bed just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I went to the bathroom, drank some water, and went back to bed. While lying in bed, not sleeping, I felt the corner of the mattress pushing down. I got so scared I could not move. I could not wake her up, so I was alone. My eyes teared up, and I felt super cold. I told my girlfriend the next day, and she asked me why I didn't wake up, and I explained it all. We have been living here for about 3 years now, and these things do not stop. When I had been out and smoking a cigarette one night, on my way to my elevator, I had to pass a glass door, and I did, but when the door closed, I heard clear as day footsteps from the exact same path as I had just walked. I got this eerie feeling once again, and all I could do was to stare at the elevator button while waiting for the elevator. It felt like forever before it came, and when the doors opened up, I was thinking, finally, and stepped in. To my surprise, those footsteps followed me inside. I got so scared I started to cry really bad. I couldn't do anything, and I remember the feeling the one behind me gave me. It was just as if he stood behind me and just wanted me to turn around because he knew I knew he was there. When floor 1 came, my floor, the doors opened up, and the whole thing was over. I walked to our apartment, and I started to cry again, so my girlfriend asked if something had happened outside, and I told her everything. These things I just wrote about are a few of my own experiences from the old hospital. My visit to Yorktown Memorial Hospital. We had heard this place was haunted and that you can get creepy things to happen if you are being A&Rs to the paranormal. I have always been able to feel things and have that eerie sixth sense some people joke about having. The day we went was on Halloween 2018. It was about a 2-hour drive away and supposed to be fun. I went with my husband and a close friend, both of whom are big skeptics. As soon as we arrived in the parking lot, my instincts were screaming at me not to go inside. I sensed that something inside was wrong, but, like the fool I am, I decided to go in anyway. Candles illuminate the desk as we enter, and the caretakers and tour guides welcome us warmly. We're told we can only use our phone lights and can take photos, and we begin our tour. The hospital had so many open doorways, but they had these cage walls to keep people from climbing over and taking things from inside. The walls were covered in graffiti, and there were holes in the ceilings and cracks throughout the building. We enter a room filled with vintage dolls and a rocking chair, and I sense a chilling sensation on my forearm. The caretaker and guide inform us about a small child who will play with guests if they take her ball and roll it down the hallway. However, if someone takes a doll from her room, she becomes upset and may scratch them. Of course, we couldn't expect a normal night on Halloween in a haunted location because once we started moving on in the tour, it began to storm. We start following the guide to the next hallway, and they continue telling us about all the amazing artifacts in the hospital still intact, like the metal bed that was just a slab that so many have died on. Once we enter the kitchen, I immediately feel a difference in energy, like something was following us but not hurting us. The guide then asks us if anyone gets the burning sensation to speak up because the other night when they did a lockdown investigation, one of the girls on the team with tattoos got burn marks out of nowhere. I didn't think much of it until we started walking down the hall where another patient, JT, passed away waiting for someone to help him because his friends abandoned him in the doorway. I could feel cold on my hands and arms. When we went upstairs, we went to see the chapel, and I felt so lightheaded standing and staring into the broken room. Down the hallway from the chapel I could smell sulfur and rotting eggs. The smell was so bad I had to cover my nose. When we walked further down the hallway, we passed a room, and a huge waft of soap hit my nose, and I felt a powerful tug on the backpack I was wearing and another tug at my hand. On this section of the tour, no one was behind me, and my group had gone ahead of me, as it felt like I was being held back. I walked to the front of the hallway and felt the urge to look down the empty hallway. I saw a tall figure resembling a skinny man, with one hand outstretched as if he were waving to me, and a bright white light in the other hand that looked like a phone but was even brighter. I started calling my husband's name because I thought it was him. He has a tendency to wander off, and he came out from the stairwell everyone else was on, and I couldn't believe it. I saw an actual dark figure with yellow eyes. One of the guys came up to me and asked if I was alright because I couldn't believe it. Were the smell and the tug related to this? Or am I just crazy? When we finally got downstairs to exit, I told my husband and best friend in the car that I saw something, and both said they felt cold gusts of wind but thought it was the storm. After that tour I had night terrors for almost a month. I would wake up crying and shaking because I could see the figure in my room, but whenever I'd be able to actually get up, it was gone. Eventually I'll go back because after this, so many other things have happened to me and my gifts. I brought something back from the hospital. So in November 2017, I was in the end stages of my pregnancy. Our apartment was heated by a gas fireplace, and stupidly, the carbon monoxide detector was in an adjacent room with the door closed. It wasn't until the door opened that we, husband and I, were aware that I was slowly being poisoned. I was sent to the hospital. While on oxygen, I went into labor, and thus began a very horrible ordeal. Anyways, 3 things happened. 1. My daughter was born. 2. Something latched onto me while I was in the ER for the poisoning. 3. My husband took a job out of state to support us while getting his career going. Week 1 after leaving the hospital, the whole time I'm in the maternity wing, I'm having issues sleeping. Insomnia is common for me, so I didn't think of it too hard. However, Every time I started to sleep, I would wake up from a panic attack. This went on for the week I was there and about a week after coming home. Eventually I was able to start sleeping, but then things started to happen. I had lived in the apartment for 3 years without any incidents, but starting in the second week after returning home, the following occurred. November 22, 2017, whispering comes from the audio baby monitor. This is a common occurrence from this point forward. December 8, the first unusual cold spot was found. The living room was always about 20 degrees warmer than the rest of the apartment, heater. But suddenly it was freezing in one spot of the room. Never cold there again. December 11th, the baby mobile's battery drained rapidly. This also became common. The first set of batteries lasted a month, all following batteries died within 72 hours. The mobile was eventually moved to my mother's house, where it operated as intended. On January 3, 2018, I no longer felt comfortable in the house. No matter where I was, the house felt cold. I began residing in my mother's house as a means to escape the discomfort of living in my apartment. February 17th, mother's landlord threatens to up my mother's rent if I don't leave. I return home. Was greeted with a horrible stench and was forced to clean my whole house top to bottom to get rid of it. Daughter starts to scream in her sleep. This occurs about once a week. I can't wake her, but she's screaming. Doctors find nothing wrong. April 1st, husband returns home. Everything stops happening. I feel like I'm crazy because no one has witnessed this but me. He gets a job at home, everything seems fine. We live happily. On August 6th, I was outside on the balcony. The door handle that I had just used with no problem broke, trapping me outside. While trying to climb down from the second floor, I fall, break my back, and end up hospitalized. My aunt moves in to help with my daughter while I recover. Months later, next entry, my aunt confesses that from day one of being there, she felt like someone was watching her and was often cold. I was drugged up for 2 months while recovering, so I don't have much to say. October 27th, we decided to move my daughter into her bedroom before her birthday. We had the baby monitor, a blanket, and a bag sitting on the coffee table when we all stepped outside, husband, aunt, daughter, and I, to see our friend in the parking lot. When we returned, the baby monitor was sitting on the floor. 3 feet away. In an upright position. This is when my husband believed me about what I said while he was gone, and my aunt confessed to her issues. October 29th, a doll that had been sitting on a shelf in my daughter's room is sitting upright in the middle of the living room the next morning. My daughter was unable to reach it or leave her crib. My aunt was sleeping on the couch and heard no one in the night. November 2018, July 2019, I'm grouping this together because there's too much stuff in the journal. Basically, the house went haywire. I have several days where multiple entries occur. Thumping, lights flickering, foul odors, cold spots, toys turning on by themselves, objects moving, whispering. And my daughter develops nightmares on an almost nightly basis. March 9th, our friend W comes to visit. In a very disturbing way to greet her, the word hello is written on the bathroom mirror from a marker that originated from a separate room. This isn't her first dealing with hauntings, so she replies with hello. Who are you? Later, it replied with Rick. June 14th, our friend L asks to use our apartment to host a party for a multi-level marketing, MLM, organization she was a part of. 30+ people show up throughout the night. One who had never stepped foot in our apartment prior commented that the bathroom light kept turning on and off the whole night. Even when no one was in there. June 29th, my mother and her boyfriend come to visit. Everyone was drinking and goofing off. Suddenly, the boyfriend demands to go home and leaves without explaining. Later, my mother informs me that he saw a black mass floating around the ceiling, hovering around me, and moving like it was pulling something out of me. He convinces my mom to have a cleansing done. July 1st, evening, my mother, with the aid of her boyfriend and guidance from his friend, performed a cleansing. Drawing everything out of the main door. My daughter screamed the whole time this was happening but immediately fell asleep once it was done. The house felt still, like frozen in time until sunrise. July 2nd, morning, a black handprint was found on the roof of the outside stairs. Context. I lived in a multifamily home. The stairs to the second floor were outside because the second floor is a separate apartment. From then on, we did not have anything else happen. We moved out in June of 2020. 2 months after my daughter asked me why we no longer lived in the old house. I told her why, and that we were not moving back there. She replied with, "Good." Mr. Black was scary, he wanted to eat my face. I was hired for a job in an assisted living facility with approximately 20 or so residents. I had seen this thing a few times before. but never as well as this one time. As I mentioned, I worked the 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift at this assisted living facility, and I found that the nighttime hours were particularly challenging for me. While working or walking the halls to ensure my residents' safety, I felt as though I was being watched, not just by my coworkers or the residents. The evening shift only had 2 staff members after 6, ending dinner, until the next shift arrived. Well, as I said, I felt watched, and it creeped me out, and it doesn't help knowing that this facility sat basically surrounded by the woods, but this small town was haunted and known to be the most haunted in the US. To give you a hint about the location, this town is also known for the Sally House. Back to the story. It was one evening in November. After the residents cleared out and went to bed, my coworker and I had some downtime. We decided to go outside for some fresh air and just play on our phones. At that moment, I felt an urge to look, so I turned my head and saw a tall man dressed entirely in black, who did not resemble any of our residents, standing in front of us through one of the side door windows that faced the porch where we were sitting. This figure was wearing a top hat that obscured half of his face. I don't know what I did or why I had to look away for a slight second, but I did, and when I looked again, he was gone. Crazy encounter at a hospital. I have hated hospitals for as long as I can remember. My grandmother has renal problems and was admitted to the hospital for almost a month at that time. My mom would make me go to the hospital and keep my grandmother company almost every single day, often until well into the afternoon. It may or may not be known that hospitals are. I guess I could say it's a hotspot for spirits, good and malevolent alike. Some come in, some go out, and others just linger. I am a huge believer in the paranormal and the unbelievable. Past experiences and my religion taught me that we are not truly alone in this world and other beings are walking among us. I can also sense ghosts and spirits even if I don't see them half the time. So short spells of dizziness, feelings of heaviness/sadness inside certain rooms and corridors, ringing in the ears, feelings of being watched, and other related symptoms were quite common. That one particular day, I stayed in the hospital with my grandmother from 2 to 5 p.m. I notified my mom and had her call me a lift. I quickly went downstairs and sat on one of the benches waiting for the lift to show up. I turned to my left and saw an old and wrinkly white man. He was wearing a white, if I remember correctly, hospital gown. He was just walking around absent-mindedly when he stopped dead in his tracks and looked in my direction. He stared into my eyes intensely and was smiling very eerily. It wasn't an I want to hurt you type of creepy, but it was more demonic. Just evil in its purest form. I felt vulnerable and exposed. I tried to look away from him, but my eyes were glued to him the same way his eyes were glued on me. I tried to say something or even yell, but I could not even open my mouth. My head was throbbing so hard it hurt. My ears were ringing loudly. I was having sharp pains in my chest, and I had trouble breathing. I felt extremely weak, sore, and exhausted as if I had just physically fought someone, and keep in mind, I haven't done much all day except sit down and assist my grandmother. Then suddenly, it all stopped. I blinked, and the man disappeared, as if he wasn't even there to start with. I couldn't believe what I'd just experienced. Lucky for me, the lift showed up a minute after because I could not bear to stay on the hospital grounds any longer. I told Mom, Dad, and my sisters about it, and we all agreed it was an evil spirit I saw, and it was feeding off of my energy. Ghostly encounters at Springfield Mental Hospital. I am a paranormal investigator in Virginia, but prior to moving, I lived in an area of Maryland that is 45 minutes northwest of Baltimore for 15 years. The area has a lot of history, and a lot has gone on in its time. The story I'm going to tell you is one that happened to me while investigating a place that is near and dear to my heart, Springfield Mental Hospital. The Springfield State Hospital Center was once a private estate and working farm owned by William Patterson, who made a large sum of money running the British blockade and settled in Baltimore in 1778. The Springfield State Hospital was established in the year 1895 in response to the urgent need for a new psychiatric hospital in the Baltimore area. The existing buildings were renovated to accept the first patients in 1896 while new buildings were under construction. While the patients waited in these structures without barred windows or locked doors, they behaved so well that the Board of Managers had the new buildings constructed without these devices. The main campus consisted of a men's group on the north side, the women's group on the south side, also known as the Warfield Complex, and the John Hubner Psychopathic Building, which provided administrative and medical services. Overcrowding plagued the hospital during the early years, like most other state institutions in the United States, as the population at Springfield exceeded 3,000 patients during the 1940s. In the 1980s, Springfield consolidated much of the campus into a smaller and more efficient complex, leaving the historic structures to decay. The presence of asbestos and other hazardous materials has placed a high price tag on demolition or remediation. The Springfield Hospital Center still operates to this day in other structures on the grounds. In fall of 2012, my friend, who I will call M for privacy reasons, and I conducted our very first paranormal investigation of the hospital buildings and property. We were very new to paranormal investigating, but we had done enough research and had studied our resources enough to know what we should and should not do. We entered the property at around 10 p.m. and went over our investigation plan. We had taken several overhead pictures of the property and had marked the areas that were known to be active paranormal areas. While we did this, we both began to notice that the whole area seemed to be encased by a feeling of heaviness and sadness. It made sense considering how many patients and staff occupied the place while it was in operation. We finished our review of the plan and headed toward our first spot, a place that we refer to as the old main building. This building looked old. The outer walls showed signs of years of decay and corrosion. Mother Nature had not treated this building well. I remember how magnificent it was, though. It was evident that quite a lot of work had gone into the masonry of the building. Even though those features were almost invisible, the inside was anything but well kept. The paint on the walls and ceiling was peeling and chipping badly. Many of the windows were broken, and shards of glass littered the floor. There was a large amount of debris scattered throughout the building. As we went deeper into the structure, the worse it got. I will mention that as soon as we stepped inside, we both felt like there were eyes on us from all sides. We entered a smaller area, and there was a part of the wall that had fallen down completely, and we had to climb over it to continue. As we went, M snapped photographs every few steps, as we wanted to have a good chance of capturing something. After making our way through the dilapidated building for about 10 minutes, we found a small room that was surprisingly bare, so we went in and sat down to conduct an EVP session. I began recording with my iPhone audio recorder, and we began taking turns asking various questions, such as, are there any spirits here that wish to communicate? Did you pass away in this hospital? Why were you admitted here? Do you like that we're in your building? After about 20 minutes of this, I stopped the audio recorder, and we began reviewing the recording, and as we were doing so, I began hearing what sounded like footsteps and shuffling sounds in the hallway that was just outside the room we were in. A few minutes later, Em and I both heard what sounded like a piece of wood hitting the ground. We immediately got up to investigate this, and we found a piece of wood the size of a 3-foot-long 2x4 lying in the hallway about 5 feet from the doorway. Em noted that he had taken a picture of the piece of wood, and it was over 15 feet away from where it originally was. We documented this and decided to continue further into the building. The feeling of being watched and being followed grew even stronger, and at one point, about an hour and a half later, we arrived at an area that felt like we needed to go in. I felt as if something was pulling me into the small area. I couldn't tell exactly what it was because of the debris. The area was too small for both of us to enter at the same time, so I had M continue taking videos and photos while I entered. I climbed over the debris pile and stepped into what I assumed was a small hospital room. I didn't have a flashlight with me, but I did have my iPhone, which I had downloaded a night vision camera function onto. I scanned the room with it and realized that the room was long and rectangular. I began walking forward when I felt as if something stood in my way and blocked me. I felt a presence in the room, and I spoke aloud, asking any spirits that were there to show themselves. What happened next changed my life and caused me to further my paranormal work. My eyes were drawn to the far right corner of the room, and suddenly, a figure began to manifest out of the darkness. It was a female, and she appeared to be wearing a patient's gown. She moved toward me. Not in an aggressive way, but in a curious way. I could see details as she approached. She had dark brown hair that came down to her shoulders and dark green eyes that looked extremely sad. Her skin was pale, and she seemed to have several cuts and bruises. Her gown was a turquoise color that you see in hospitals. She didn't seem like she floated to me, she appeared to just walk normally toward me. She stood in front of me roughly 6 to 8 feet away, and we made direct eye contact. What stuck in my mind is how sad and lonely and scared she looked. She looked surprised but relieved that I was there. I later found out through doing a spirit box session in a later investigation of the hospital that she was a patient and she stayed there for 7 years. She didn't know why she was there, and she informed us that she couldn't find her way out and that she'd been looking for someone to help her. I stood still and speechless, staring at this female apparition, and after what felt like years, she spoke. Her words changed me as a person. She said 5 words. Death is not the end. Her voice was sorrowful, and I had never heard any voice like it in my entire life. She stayed there looking at me for several more minutes, and then she turned, walked back to the other side of the room, and then she was gone. I don't know how long I stood there not moving and not saying anything. I had no idea how to process what had just happened. A female spirit had appeared, walked up to me, and had spoken directly to me. I know this wasn't a hallucination because I don't have any history of it, and neither does my family. I wasn't sleep deprived because I had slept for nearly 7 hours the day of the investigation to prepare myself. After what felt like ages, I heard M calling for me, and I slowly walked out of the room and made my way to him. I told him what happened, and he was absolutely in shock. That is the story of my very first paranormal encounter. You can choose to believe it or not. It's your choice. Some of you may think I am insane or that I am lying, but that's okay. I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt, and what I experienced. Think whatever you want. I hope you enjoyed this. Old hospital teardown. I have been working at a hospital in IT for 4 years now, and this building is just over 6 years old. It replaced an older hospital that had been in use for nearly 50 years, which had experienced significant deterioration. During the final shutdown phase, the IT team was finally removing all of the old equipment that was not repurposed at the new facility, so we had to visit all 7 floors and the basement multiple times. We'd do our usual trouble tickets in the morning, then go to the old building after lunch. By the time we finished, it would be dark outside. The basement wasn't too bad, it was where our offices and the bulk of the facility's offices were located. It was the upper floors, specifically the 5th and 6th floors, where things got a little creepy. The 5th floor was turned into a long-term nursing facility a few years before the building was shut down. The 6th floor was where OB and pediatrics were located. One day I and another tech were walking the 5th floor looking for phones, old monitors, etc. He was at the east end of the hall, and I was about 40 feet away at the nurse's station in the center, unhooking a few monitors that had been left. The other tech walked out of one of the rooms and started walking towards me when a door, located on the opposite side of the hallway from the room he had just exited and 2 rooms closer to the nurse's station, suddenly slammed shut. These doors opened in, and there was no one else in the entire building but the 2 of us. We both watched it closely. He halted abruptly, and we exchanged glances for a brief moment before agreeing to postpone the visit to the 5th floor until later in the day. About a week later we were on the 6th floor doing the same kind of work, and having found the pediatrics media closet with quite a few Disney DVDs, we were in a pretty good mood. Until someone giggled. We were on that floor for 3 days, and that was actually a fun project, and by the end we had named the 6th floor Ghost Petey. He liked to giggle behind us as we worked. I wish we could have taken photos of the hallways and recorded the sounds we had heard through the entire building. By the very end, if one of us dropped something or made a noise, we would yell, "That was me," just in case. Returning to work at a haunted hospital. Years ago, I worked security at an old hospital. It used to be a 6-story, 2-building hospital with an extra wing for pediatrics and a morgue in the basement. In 2008, they built a new hospital across town and abandoned everything besides the emergency room and the short stay and rehab wings. Creepy by itself, and then add that the hospital opened in 1924. It's seen more than its fair share of patients passing. We always joked that the place was haunted, claiming we could hear children laughing in the old pediatric wing, see a shadow move out of the corner of our eyes, or notice objects shifting when we weren't looking. Creepy, but explainable. I always stood by these being real experiences and tried to reach out and tell the spirits they didn't need to hide around me, unless I was engaged in a security matter. They seemed to listen, and I typically had 2 or 3 encounters a night. I left there for a better job, and shortly after, the hospital chose to demolish the abandoned areas, including the old morgue and hallways used to transport patients' bodies in the basement. Well, I've returned to work at what's left of the hospital. It definitely had a heavy feeling coming back. While making rounds, I found a quiet place to reach out. I greeted any spirits who may be remaining after being displaced in the construction, set some rules, no touching, no following me home, and no intentional scaring, and I will provide a willing participant for communication, and continued on with my shift. Half an hour later, I saw a nun in the main lobby. Not uncommon, it's a Catholic hospital. But the nun walked toward where the chapel used to be and not where it was moved. I followed her to point her toward the new chapel, but she vanished after rounding the corner. I chuckled, realizing what was going on, and drove on. A few hours later, while in the restroom in the far end of the hospital, it's quieter and cleaner, I heard a loud sigh in the stall behind me. Okay, cool. The guest found the better bathroom. The toilet flushed, and the auto door to the bathroom opened. The catch? No one exited the stall, and no one entered the restroom. I checked the stalls real quick, and they were all empty. Nice to see I wasn't just crazy half a decade ago, and the unexplained still happens. Was told to share this here. I used to live in an apartment complex that used to be a hospital. Specifically, I lived in the old emergency department entry hallway. There was an apartment directly next to mine. We were both on the side of the building with our entrances. I was good friends with the couple next to me. Let's call them Kim and Rick. One day, I was smoking outside my door, and Kim came out to smoke with me. She seemed agitated. I asked her about it, and she said she got into a big fight with Rick last night. He was pulling into the parking lot after being at work all day, and he glimpsed into the bedroom window, which is visible when driving through that part of the parking lot. He saw a man, wearing a hospital gown, sitting on the end of the bed. He immediately stormed in and asked who it was. They had been having marital difficulties, and he thought she was having an affair, but she had no idea what he was talking about. A few nights later, I speak with Kim again. She's even more agitated this time. She said that the other night, she was pulling into the parking lot after going to the grocery store, and she looked into the bedroom window. She saw a man, wearing a hospital gown, sitting on the end of her bed. She and Rick were both confused and frustrated, not to mention creeped out. They really didn't know what to do about this, and I don't blame them. At any rate, they never mentioned it again. Fast forward several years later. Kim and Rick have divorced and moved out, but a new couple is moving in. I offer to help them unpack, and we strike up a conversation. We get onto the subject of the building being an old apartment complex, and the woman, let's call her Dee, says that they saw something very weird when they started moving in. Dee was riding in the passenger seat of the U-Haul while her fiancé drove. They had already unloaded most of the furniture, including their bed, so they were just bringing over one last load of smaller things. Dee said that she happened to look in the window facing the parking lot, and she saw a man wearing a hospital gown. The man was sitting at the end of Dee's bed. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I asked if she or her fiancé knew the previous tenants. They did not. I never told either couple about this afterwards. I guess I'm just keeping it to myself. Until now, anyway. I have been a patient for a long time in hospitals, and I have asked doctors and nurses of their experiences. It turns out most of them can say they had seen things, like doors that shut themselves and leave the staff locked, without any logical explanation. But the most paranormal thing is that many in Mexico had seen a very specific nurse, whom they call La Planchada. She was a woman in nurse attire from around 1950 to 1960. A nurse told me that she was alone on the night shift on the floor, which is common in hospitals in Mexico, especially if there is little staff, so she was in need of placing in 4 on a patient, and so, she needed the cart, El Carro, which has the medications and all of that. She then saw a kind nurse who passed her the equipment physically, and then she did the procedure. She wanted to thank her, but the nurse was gone. The next day, she asked her coworkers about the new nurse and provided a description of her. They told my nurse that the nurse she had seen didn't exist and that she was alone on the floor when that happened. Patients have also seen her. I spoke to a man who told me that his mom was in labor. The nurses at her hospital treated her very badly and didn't change her bed sheets or give her medications for the pain. Then, she saw a nurse who had light brown skin, wore a uniform, was kind, and had black hair. She was very kind, comforted her, and gave her an injection that took away her pain. Later on, she asked for that nurse, and it turned out that nurse didn't work there and didn't exist. I personally had my 2 experiences. The first one, I was dying from sepsis at 16. I was in a shock room. I saw a poor man who was given CPR. It is very violent in real life, nothing like the movies. The air in the room was so dense and horrible, it was so oppressive. The atmosphere was horrific, out of suffering. Then, after they tried to revive him, the man was declared dead. The air in the room, the feeling, changed. It was like something, his soul, was liberated. Then his niece, I think, was allowed to see him. She hugged him, and all felt at peace, like his soul was free. It was very traumatizing, but at least I was relieved that he didn't suffer anymore. Then, when I was worsening and at the intensive care unit, I was in and out of consciousness. I cannot assert that my testimony is reliable. After all, I experienced periods of delirium due to the sepsis, and today, I find myself both skeptical and believing in the paranormal. But I had the exact same experience with the nurse. She spoke to me, comforted me, and then gave me an injection. Before, I only had mild medications for the pain, like naproxen, but I needed morphine or something stronger. After all, I also had gangrene in my right ankle and a pelvis fracture alongside sepsis, renal failure, and pneumonia, so she injected me, and I felt, which is what makes me wonder, instant relief, kind of the sensation of having a strong opioid injected. Later on, I took opioids by prescription and even fentanyl for a surgery, And what makes me wonder is that the injection that the nurse gave me had very and extremely similar effects to the real experience of those kinds of medications, which I had never taken before. That is what makes me wonder. I also saw a German doctor who checked my monitors constantly. I asked for both the nurse and the doctor, but I was told neither was present. The nurse was no longer employed there, and no doctor matched the description. My pediatric intensive care unit, as I later knew, was called Dr. Sylvestre Frank Freund, named after the doctor who founded that pediatric intensive care unit and had his team of doctors. Could it be that my mind recollected the story of the planchata and made me see her? It could be. Maybe I overheard the name of the intensive care unit, and I fabricated the doctor in my mind. After all, Germany and doctors in medicine, German doctors, are something that is in my subconscious, but I wonder if it was something more, especially taking into account many experiences. By the way, I knew the story of the man speaking about his mother years after my experience had occurred. I also experienced many additional events, but once again, the distinction between mental experiences and paranormal occurrences is very subtle. 2 encounters in a mental hospital. So this incident happened back when I was in high school. I was taking a psychology class. I don't know why I decided to take it, as I never really was into the subject, although I thought it was something new to try. Anyways, one day our teacher got us permission to visit a mental hospital here in town. Now I am not sure if there is a better name to use for the place, so I do apologize. Anyways, we go in and are shown several different areas with no patients, except for one who drilled in the idea that many of the patients there are literally dropped off and are never visited again. Which is awful. On multiple occasions, I was convinced that I saw someone peeking around the corner at us. But every time I looked that way or when we got to that area, it was empty. And before you say, well, it might have been a patient that slipped back into a room, one area had a steel bar door, and the other was a dead end with no door there. Besides, I never heard a door close, and there was no attendant near the area where the incident happened. Initially, after we returned to the classroom, I assumed it was a patient or two peeking out at us while we moved around, but then I realized that there was no possible way anyone could have been there. I saw something in my hospital room. So I'm a week out of the hospital after spending 2 weeks there with COVID-19 and pneumonia. I have a lot of serious health issues and barely survived my stay, but at the end of my stay, I was woken up at about 4 a.m. by the nurse coming in to give me more antibiotics and change my fluid drip. The nurse left to get a new tube for the drip, and while she was gone, I rolled over in my bed and saw an elderly man standing at the foot of my bed, with his hand resting on the bottom rail, looking out the window. Initially I thought it was one of the elderly gents on the same ward wandering into my room again. It had happened multiple times as they all had dementia or delirium, so I spoke to him and asked him if he was alright, but he didn't respond, so I buzzed for the nurse, and she came back in a rush, and the man vanished before my eyes and, I believe, before the nurse's too, as she stopped and stared for a moment before shaking her head and continuing. I tried to ask her about the incident, but she insisted that I must be dreaming. However, each time she returned to my room, she glanced at the spot where the man had been standing. I'm not sure what I actually saw that night, and I didn't recognize the man at all. Experience in a 19th century mental hospital. I can talk about this now, as I am no longer with the company, and I didn't want my boss or colleagues to think I was a crackpot, so here goes. In 2018 I was working for a company installing video conferencing solutions, and one particular job took me to a mental health facility in Brisbane, Australia, called Woolson Park Hospital, originally called the Woogaroo Lunatic Asylum. It's a large precinct with multiple buildings, many dating from approximately 1865, and has quite a sinister history with reports of intolerable living conditions and mass burials. The main hospital now lies derelict and is frequented by adventure seekers. However, my job on this day was based in one of the smaller wards, called Bostick House, which was built in 1885. I don't think this building has housed patients for quite some time, and it still seems to have the original structure and layout of a 19th century psychiatric ward with rooms that are more like prison cells. The ground floor has one main open area, possibly a day lounge area in its time, which features a large boardroom table that is used by local community groups for meetings. This is where I was to install the video conferencing system. There is another large fully enclosed room directly behind this space, about 15 meters, 50 feet down a hallway, and the rest, from memory, is hallways with cells. When I arrived I was met by the customer, an elderly gentleman who remained in the room with me the whole time while I set up the hardware. There was no one else in the building, that I was aware of. After finishing the installation, I needed to test the equipment, so I took my laptop into the other room, sat at one of the desks, there were a few in there, and connected a two-way video session to the main conference room equipment. The customer and I had a 5 minutes call, which all went well. With the door closed in this room, you could not hear anything coming from outside, so it was a good test scenario. I wanted to swap places with the customer and have him come into the room to experience the video and audio from my laptop, so I left the live meeting connected and went out to the conference room to suggest this. When I got there, we first had a brief conversation, and during this time we both noticed some strange noises coming through the feed from my unattended laptop back in the other room. It sounded like the rustling of pages, some chair scrapes, and very clearly a man coughing, but as I couldn't see anyone on the video feed, I assumed someone had entered the room and was out of camera view. Think large room, small laptop camera. The more obvious possibility of someone remotely joining the meeting was basically impossible due to the custom security protocols I use. It was at this point the customer asked if I had brought someone with me that he didn't know about, and I said no, and that I thought maybe there was another staff member in the building. He said not that he knew of, and we both looked at each other for a second in bewilderment. I proceeded back to the room, expecting it now to be occupied, but there was no one there. I again spoke to the customer on video, and it all seemed normal, the noises had stopped. I again went back out to the conference room, and we stood in silence for about 30 seconds, and the noises started up again. I ran back to the room, and again, it was unoccupied, and the noises had ceased. At this stage I felt the customer was getting a bit uncomfortable with the situation, and I was also getting a bit freaked out, but as I had to maintain a professional manner, I decided not to make a big deal about it. I closed my laptop and joined him back in the main room, and just as I was about to make a funny quip and say my goodbyes, the building's fire alarm went off. We both visibly jumped but settled immediately to deal with the situation. We went to the alarm control box, but there was nothing we could do to stop it. I stayed with him while he called the facility services, and within around 10 minutes a tech came and stopped it. The three of us stood for a few minutes talking about how the tech couldn't remember it ever going off before in the years he had been there, apart from tests, and then lo and behold, it goes off again. At this point I felt I didn't need to be there and left quite briskly. The time I saw a ghost in a nursing home. So I was working the first shift, and it was about 3 p.m. I worked a hallway lined with 15 rooms for mostly palliative care patients. The room I had the experience in belonged to a very Alzheimer's affected lady. She would say things like there are people looking at her through the window and talk to the people in her room. That's normal and didn't make me think she was seeing actual spirits. But then I saw something I can't explain. Her call light went off in her room. But I was confused because she was not in her room. She was at an activity. So I start walking towards the room, down the hallway, and I see a shadow of a person. No face. No features, just a shadow. Except it's not on the wall, it's in the hallway, in front of the room. I keep walking towards the room, and it starts to move into the room. The door's open, so we are both moving towards the room and going through it. It enters the room and disappears around the corner toward the call light. At first, standing in the room, I was scared, and tears welled up in my eyes, but then I just walked out and didn't really think much about it again. Didn't tell anyone either. 2 weeks later, I'm in the same room with another CNA, and she brings up the dark figure that appears in this room and another room. I was shocked because I had seen it 2 weekends ago. She went on to tell me a few other experiences people have had, and I'm just in shock. Just thought I'd share my story. Was this a shadow person or just a ghost? Nightly happenings in the former hospital. I have lived in a former hospital, built in 1925, for almost 10 years. I'm not a firm believer in the paranormal, but a few things happened that kept me pondering. One night I was up late, studying for an exam. In the far right corner of my room was a bookshelf with some CDs on it. Suddenly one of those CDs fell on the ground. It was so out of place that it almost seemed fake. I stared at the CD, but nothing else happened. Didn't know what to think of it. Chicken shit as I was, I decided to spend the night elsewhere. A few months later, I woke up in the middle of the night in mortal fear, too scared to move. I can't remember to this day what scared me, I only remember that horrible feeling. Maybe people who are at the brink of dying feel this? That state of complete terror lasted about 10 minutes before it faded away. Couldn't get much sleep after that. Another time I woke up and saw a dark figure right beside me on the bed. Although I couldn't see his face, I knew it was looking at me. My heart almost stopped, and the only thing I could do was to close my eyes and hope that whatever the duck that was, it would go away. After a long while the thing disappeared, and with it my sleep and my sense of security. A few years later I moved into another room. The atmosphere there is very pleasant and quiet. No weird nightmares, no CDs falling off shelves. I'm still wondering about the CD and those nightly episodes. Did I suffer from night terrors, or was it something darker? Do you have similar experiences? Unsurprisingly, creepy things happen in old hospitals. Okay, so I've always been susceptible to the idea of ghosts being real. Ghost stories have always been the only scary thing that actually frightened me, although I still seek them out, obviously, but until I was about 20, I had never had an experience myself and so still maintained a little skepticism about paranormal stuff, even though it was fun to think about. This story is about when I finally experienced something that convinced me. It's kind of long and a three-parter, one experience that was mine and two experiences that my coworkers had. I went to college at a university that was founded in the 1890s and has a major hospital that was built in 1927, and added to since then. For a couple of years, I was a tech in the sleep research lab there. The research lab was in the oldest part of the hospital, which was kind of shabby compared to the newer wings. As a tech, you would sometimes have to spend the night in the lab to make sure the subject got to sleep on time with all their electrodes in place and to wake them up on time in the morning. During one of my night shifts, I put the subject to bed at 1:30, made sure the computers were recording, locked up the office, and went to one of the spare subject rooms, room C. The subject rooms were basically like hotel rooms that opened onto a typically hospital-like hallway. Other than the subject in the room across the hall, I was alone. The research hall was fairly short and closed at both ends by wooden double doors that were locked from the inside at night. I closed the door and went to the sink in the room to splash water on my face, and while I had my head down, I heard a high-pitched, feminine voice right next to my ear. It seemed really loud, but the room was dead silent when it happened, so any level of noise would have seemed loud. I instinctively jumped and whirled around, believing that the sleep subject, a young woman, had inadvertently entered my room to inquire about something, only to discover that no one was present and that the door remained closed. I stuck my head into the hallway, but everything was quiet, and the subject's door was closed. I calmed down and dismissed it. I was alone in the lab hallway, but the hospital wasn't empty. I thought the voices had traveled through the vents, even though there weren't any on that side of the room, or that loud janitors were walking down the hallway, even though they weren't allowed to clean the lab at night. Anyway, my point is that at no point did I assume it was a ghost or anything weird like that. I think I even forgot about it by the next morning. A couple of weeks later, I was working in the afternoon and talking to the tech who was going to have to stay overnight. I'll call him H. I was in the only free room, which had 2 subjects this time. My coworker said that he was going to pull out the cot and sleep in the office with all the computers instead, and I asked why. He explained that several weeks earlier, while he was sleeping in that room, room C, he had a nightmare in which he found himself floating in the corner by the ceiling, observing 2 female nurses and a little girl with long dark hair near the door. The nurses were struggling to hold the little girl still while she was screaming and kicking. One of the nurses stuck a large needle in the girl's arm, and the girl looked straight at H and screamed at him for help. Then he woke up. He said that he normally doesn't remember his dreams and that it was the most vivid, horrible dream he'd ever had, and he couldn't get back to sleep that night. But hey, it was just a dream, so he didn't think much of it.
Until the next day, when he told yet another co-worker of ours, I'll call him M, I actually can't even remember his name, about the dream.
M, usually a laid-back guy, started freaking out over H's story and said that, a few nights earlier, he had also been staying in room C. Before turning in, he went to a cabinet down the hall to get some extra blankets, and when he turned around to go back to room C, he saw a little boy and a little girl standing right next to the door. After a second, they disappeared. Of course, the little girl had long dark hair, just like the girl in H's dream. So when I heard from H about his and M's experiences, I remembered the voice I had heard and told him about my experience. I really believe that the voice I heard was the little girl trying to talk to me. But I never went back in that room at night and rarely ventured in during the day. I always felt like I was being watched, so I had no other experiences. One night, I took my digital voice recorder in the room and said, "I'm leaving this here overnight, so if you have anything to say, now's your chance." And then I slept on the cot in the office. But in the morning, when I went to check the recording, I discovered that the batteries had died about 10 seconds into it. It might be a coincidence, but since I had only used that recorder once before, it seemed a little fishy. I never attempted to record again using fresh batteries, and I still regret that decision. I think I just wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear anything on the recording. To top off the whole thing? And this is going to sound fake, but I swear this is all true. The sleep research hallway used to be the location of the hospital's child psychiatry ward, which got moved to a nearby wing when a building addition was added in the 60s/70s. Despite my predilection for wanting to believe in ghosts, I had not been even slightly nervous about being in an old hospital at night up to that point. I spent most of my daytime hours working various jobs there, so the hospital had long since lost any inherent creepiness for me. I used to regularly wander around the empty basement hallways of the hospital after midnight on those late shifts, hitting up the vending machines. Good times. Ghosts at the hospital. I work at a hospital in an office space area, and everyone usually leaves at around 5 p.m., whereas I leave around 11 p.m. In this section there is a long hallway with offices on each side, but at the end there is one single clock and a doorway that leads outside to the back. I've seen ghosts here and there out of the corner of my eye when walking down this hallway, but one incident really scared me. I was sitting at a desk where you can see all the way to the end of the hallway, and it is an uneasy feeling. While taking phone calls, I saw something standing kind of behind me but to my side a bit too, and it was hunched over. I initially thought that one of my close coworkers or friends was playing a prank on me, but I jumped when I turned around and realized it wasn't her. It quickly disappeared, and I was still in shock because of what I had just seen. As I stated, it was hunched over, and it was most definitely a shadow figure with no face. When everyone is gone, other small occurrences will happen. For instance, when I step outside the office to walk down the hallway, I hear papers moving and what sounds like someone typing on a keyboard, but the noise instantly stops as I get closer. Thanks for listening to my story. Experience working at a hospital. So a couple years ago I worked at a hospital as security. The second shift's security duties included locking all the basement doors. The types of things down there ranged from offices, supply rooms, bathrooms, and the morgue. We'd also need to check the morgue's refrigeration temp, but that's not important. One night, I went down to the basement, which is essentially a large rectangle, and locked all the doors, and just as I was about to turn right to take the stairs up, I noticed someone walking out of the corner. I noticed someone walk out of the corner, in what looked like blue scrubs, and take about 5 steps into one of the doors I locked. They didn't open the door or anything, they just walked right in. As a security officer, I couldn't ignore this incident because we had recently experienced thefts from the supply room, so I felt it was necessary to investigate, especially since it was after hours. As I walked up to the door, I immediately got goosebumps because this specific door was an automatic locking door that can only be accessed by ID clearance. 2. I didn't see the individual pull out an ID, which you have to do to get in. You pull out your ID, scan, wait for the green light to pop up, and then open the door. I literally just saw someone take about 5 steps into the door like it was wide open, which it wasn't. This door automatically locks and closes itself. So I think to myself, well, if somehow someone accessed the door after hours, they aren't allowed to, so this might be the person who's stealing stuff. If a nurse or someone needs to go to the supply room, they call security, and security escorts them because of stealing incidents. So I pull out my ID, scan it, and open the door. I walked in and saw nobody. Then I opened all the closet doors to confirm that no one was hiding, and I immediately left because I was 100% sure I had just seen a ghost. Later that night I got a call from the ER department to escort a nurse down to the supply room, and we made sweet love. Lol JK I wish. What actually happened was that I escorted her down to the basement, into the supply room, and told her what I saw. She then shuffled through some boxes in the supply room and pulled out the same exact looking light blue scrubs that I saw the ghost wearing. Except they weren't scrubs, they were the blue gowns patients wear inside the hospital. So what I saw that night was a patient's ghost walking around the basement. After this experience I definitely believe in ghosts and the afterlife. To this day I kick myself for not looking at the cameras that night. Haunted intensive care unit. I am an ICU nurse in France. The ICU ward is made of a long corridor, providing access to 4 units of 5 rooms. One night shift we talked about ghosts with coworkers, and I stated that they do not exist at all. Around 1 hour later a patient begins to spit blood as usual, so I go with my coworker to suck the blood out of his mouth with the suction unit. After 5 minutes of suction, the unit stopped the suction. I thought a blood clot blocked the system. I followed the line to see the clot and saw nothing except that the device was turned off. It's a key we have to turn to put it on or off. I tried to rationalize the event, but it's not an electrical device, so dysfunction is impossible. Strange feeling. My coworker told me that I should keep my mouth shut because someone has something to say to me. Later in the same night, 2 patients separated by 2 rooms told us they saw a woman in pink. We all wear white uniforms, no visitors are allowed after 10 p.m., and it was 3 a.m. Goosebumps. No more unsettling events for the rest of the night. The following day, near 3 a.m., in one room, the light constantly lit up by itself. Every time we turned the light off, it was on when we exited the room. We could stay in the room, the light remains off, but as soon as we leave this room, the light turns on. After 5 lights on/off/on, I turned off the light and said, Enough, I've had it. And the light remains off. 3 days later near 3 a.m., again, we heard a huge crack on the unit door, and the door began to shake. We looked at each other and new crack, new shaking. We checked through the windows, and we can see no one, the corridor's lights remain off, motion sensor. Some weird shit happened later involving the death of a patient, but I cannot say more for obvious purposes. Everything I wrote is true, I am not afraid to work at night. I don't know if I offended some spirits, but it's really disturbing. She just wanted to say goodbye. My grandma was diagnosed with severe emphysema. I don't remember how the stages work, but she was put on an oxygen tank pretty much full time. I was 11. At her house, her oxygen cord was our map to her. We would just follow it. She was usually in the garage turned recreation room, smoking a cigarette, while the oxygen tank pumped away. It was no surprise that she wasn't going to last much longer, obviously. She ended up in the hospital. They told us she didn't have much longer. She said she wanted to die at home. At the time, her father was living with her and my grandpa. So we had to move my great-grandpa out of the house for this. She liked his room because it faced the huge backyard and had floor-to-ceiling windows. So did her room, but her room faced the front yard, which was just some trees and the road. She wanted to look at nature. She wanted to watch the deer use the feeders my grandpa put out for them. She wanted to see the birds and the squirrels and all of the other critters who were common guests in the backyard. When her time was coming close to the end, none of the grandchildren were allowed to go in to see her. This upset us because we just wanted to tell her we love her. We just wanted to see our grandma. I don't think we fully understood what the situation was. We were all familiar with death, because at that point in our lives, we had already lost other people. Just no one that we were so close with. My cousin and I decided to sneak out and peek through the window. Looking back, it was a huge mistake. The image will haunt me for the rest of my life. My grandma lay there in the bed, surrounded by all of her children. She looked so small and frail. The woman we had all looked up to, and who had taught us all to be so strong, was gone. She was bent over and puking into a bucket held by one of my aunts. Her face was gaunt and hollow and pale. We didn't look very long, I can tell you that much. And that was it. We went to bed, hoping that we would be able to go into the room the next day to see her. Now, I was an early riser as a child. I never slept in. Whenever my one cousin and I, we were the only two girls, and we are a year apart in age, so we were always doing things together, would spend the night at grandma and grandpa's, I would always wake up first. Which I loved, because that gave me time to spend with my grandmother. Just the two of us. It always felt so special. So I woke up well before everyone else the next morning. I looked at the pretty bird-themed clock on the wall. 6:45 a.m. I wandered into the kitchen because I could smell coffee, and there she was. My grandmother was sitting in the nook, just off of the kitchen. She had her coffee and was doing her puzzle while she watched all the backyard critters. She looked happy and vibrant. She greeted me the same way she always had. "Good morning, doll, Grandma. How are you feeling? You look so much better," I said to her. She answered me with her eyes. She asked me if I wanted some juice, and I cheerfully nodded my head. She had a lot of those old Kool-Aid Man cups. The ones made out of the weird plastic were shaped like the Kool-Aid Man. She got one of those cups down and filled it with orange juice for me. We sat in silence for a while, just watching the deer and the birds. Occasionally looking down and fitting a puzzle piece together. We didn't talk much, but after about 15 minutes she said I should get back to bed and get a little more rest. I told her I love her, and I went back next to my cousin on the floor. A couple hours later my aunt was shaking me awake. She was crying, and she told me that Grandma had passed away. I was so confused because I just saw her. And she looked better. And she was going to make it, I just knew it. My aunt, looking puzzled, asked me when I saw her. And I told her around 7 a.m. that morning. She said, "Sweetheart. That's impossible. Your grandma passed away around 2 a.m. I must have dreamt it, I thought to myself. My mind must have played a horrible trick on me. And that wouldn't have been the first time that it did. My imagination was severely overactive. I ran into the kitchen, where I found my cup of juice still sitting on the table. I work in a smaller pre-op surgical unit. We have 12 beds in our unit, 3 have doors, and 9 have curtains. Our monitors, which display vital signs, are connected to a monitor in the room that is linked back to our computer station. We will see blood pressures and oxygen readings from empty rooms. We have observed poles moving across the room randomly, and patients have requested to leave because of this. In front of our nurses' station, we have a room where we put people who are confused, have dementia, or have major fall risks so we can keep an eye on them. In that room, there was a fire that randomly started 2 years ago, and nobody knows how. Patients frequently beg and plead to be moved from that room because they claim to see monsters there. We had a crucifix in there, and the head of it wound up ripped off and embedded in the ceiling, and we had priests come up multiple times to bless the unit and the room in particular, but it just has a bad presence to it. Spirits hanging around at the hospital. I work in a medical lab in a series of hospitals, and lately I've been working in one that has a seniors' home attached. One wing caters to seniors who are incapacitated and unable to care for themselves, such as those in wheelchairs, while the other wing accommodates seniors suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's, and other conditions. Usually when I drive into work, at least once a month, the flags out front are at half-mast, meaning one of the seniors has passed away. The medical lab in this hospital has a small waiting area outside, and the rooms in the lab are in an L shape. The smaller part is the blood collection room, and the longer part is the actual lab with machinery, etc. The door that connects the collection room to the lab is located at the point where the long side and short side of the L meet, and this same door serves as the entrance from the waiting room to the collection room. One morning, I was working alone while the other tech was out performing x-rays. As I made my way from the lab to the waiting room, I caught a glimpse of a man standing at the door. He was wearing an old jacket, baseball cap, and jeans. Very normal wear for older men in this area. As I was moving from one foot to the other, I assumed he was waiting for blood work, and so I turned to ask him. When I turned to face him, there was no one there. I laughed it off, assuming I had just seen things, and went to my computer, sat down, and did some work. When it was time to go back into the lab and unload the centrifuge, I passed the open door and now saw the same man, in the same place, out of the corner of my right eye. Again, I turned, and again, no one. At this point, I began to feel a sense of unease. Leaving the lab to walk back into the collection room, passing the open door, I went slower this time, and yes, holy crap, he was still there. Now seen out of the corner of my left eye, as the first time. While I do believe in spirits and the like, I always believe that 90% of the time there is a perfectly normal explanation for everything. There is a potted plant in my house that, if you see it from the corner of your eye, looks like a big shaggy dog sitting there. We've never had a big shaggy dog, and our house was built on that land, so I know there aren't any shaggy dog ghosts going around. It's how your eye sees things. But at this point I'm starting to get even more freaked out. A part of me wants to see if I can contact him, a part just wants him to go away. About 10 minutes later, the other tech has returned. As she's walking from the collection room to the lab, she stops and gives a start. She looks back at me and laughs and says, "I thought I just saw an old man sitting in the chairs there." I look at her and simply say, "I've been seeing him all morning." "Are you serious?" "Very." We never saw him again, but the next day, we learned one of our seniors had passed away that afternoon. I guess it was either someone who had passed and was lost, or he was waiting for the other senior. Either way, I won't be forgetting it for a while. Followed home from the hospital. I didn't know where else to share this, so I'll share it here. I've experienced paranormal/unexplained events my entire life. Since I was very little, I would see people, or angels, as I called them. I have bipolar disorder, which sometimes acts up severely enough to make me admit myself into a hospital. Mostly for fear that I may hurt myself or do something irrational. I'll note that this does not cause me to hallucinate in any way, shape, or form. Not once in my life has my mental state caused me to see or hear things that weren't there. I went to the local hospital, where I was admitted into the mental ward for observation. Based on how I was feeling after a few hours there, it would determine whether they transferred me to the county mental hospital or released me. In the meantime, they took a blood test, and I was allowed to lie down in my room with a TV. I endured a few hours of watching Naked and Afraid on the Discovery Channel and them taking and retaking my blood. I can't remember why the initial blood samples were insufficient, so they hooked up an 4-line to my arm to avoid repeatedly poking me. This is where things get a little strange. Now, the door was left open, of course, with the lights off. So the doctors and nurses could check on me easily by peeking their heads inside. At some point, I had my back turned to the door, a blanket wrapped around me, and eyes closed. I figured I should try to rest after being so wound up and emotional all day. For some reason, it felt really uncomfortable to sleep with my back toward the door. I've felt this way before when I experienced paranormal activity in a previous home. The feeling was very similar. I would turn back to look, feeling a presence and thinking a nurse was coming in. All I managed to see was a dark shadow moving away from the door and into the corner of my room, into the shadows. I blinked a few times and thought it was merely the contrast of light and dark playing tricks on my eyes. I do have questionable vision at times. However, it kept happening. I would see a shadow in my peripheral vision, and when I turned, it was gone. After a while, I only assumed it was a nurse peeking in at me. But it was a very strange way to do it, considering this is the mental ward. It just appeared to be a head peeking around the door, and then it was gone. There were no recognizable features or any other characteristics. Just black. Like I said, I've experienced events and happenings like this all the time. But I didn't want to think every little strange thing that happened to me was because of a ghost. I really try to look at the rational side first. I went home a few hours later, and starting that night, I had terrible nightmares. I may have been going through mental issues, but I was not having nightmares before this. Trust me when I say, I never have nightmares. And these were awful ones. I had nightmares about the death of my loved ones, including my baby niece. That one disturbed me enough to wake up in tears. Not only that, but I was waking up every night around 3:30 a.m. Every single night. And I would feel some sort of presence there. I live alone, and I've never felt paranoia like this before. It felt as though someone was watching me through my windows and from the crack of my door. It was felt everywhere. IDK how to explain it. So I always went to bed early, wanting to be asleep at that time of night to avoid that awful feeling of being watched. But no matter what, I was awake around 3 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep properly because of that awful feeling. It took me a long time to connect the person I saw at the hospital and the feelings I experienced in my own home. I've always been a firm believer that extreme negativity can draw spirits to you, good or bad. I've had similar experiences in the past. I started to believe that whatever or whoever this was must have followed me from the hospital. Or, that's what I think anyway. I was obviously shrouded in negativity, given my mental state at the time. And you know what? As soon as I acknowledged what this thing might be, I never experienced nightmares or that deep feeling of dread in the middle of the night ever again. I've been nightmare-free since then. I'm a firm believer that whoever it was only wanted some acknowledgement. Some attention. Good or bad. I hope that it is no longer attached to this world and was able to let go. Believe me or not. You may attribute it to my mental state or any other reason you find appropriate. I know it really happened. Creepy hospital experience. Just over a year ago my father had a heart attack. The cardiac part of the hospital goes in one way and out another, so it's pretty hard to find the right door when you're new to visiting that ward. The first time he was admitted, my mother and I found it easy to get there. There are normally a lot of staff around to help. However, the second or third time he had gone onto the ward, they get taken straight there if they have chest pains and go to the emergency department. It was at a less busy time in the hospital, as we were dropping off his medication rather than visiting. Before I really start, I just want to give a clear picture of the hospital. It has 3 entrances, 2 at the front and 1 at the back, with various car parks based around these doors. A bridge connects the old and new buildings that make up the hospital. The cardiac ward is in the old part of the hospital, however, this door has limited parking. We enter through the back door instead of the direct entrance to the cardiac ward because the parking in that area is full, which leads us into the new building. We must go to the hospital's top and the other side. We are unsure of our destination, so we ask a nurse for directions to the cardiac ward. However, the directions she provides are unclear, and as a result, we follow them for a while and end up completely lost. We ask another nurse for directions, but we still end up lost. Both of us struggle with following directions, fitting the stereotype of being clueless. So we try following signs, but we aren't sure where we are, as neither of us is familiar with the part of the hospital we have made our way into. Eventually we end up in an elevator that looks like a service one, as it has a sliding mesh door rather than the solid metal ones. The buttons claim that they can get us back to where we came from, so we take them. This puts us at the other end of a corridor that we have been on before, so we take another elevator to put us down to the right floor, which ended up not being the right floor. We now have the option of going to floor 0, which my mom informs me is the morgue, as you need a key to get down there, or floor 3 unless we want to go higher up. We press to take floor 3 and end up in this empty white hallway with a disused end-of-life cancer ward. Creepy as hell, I'm instantly creeped out. We are in a white hallway that features an old ward with abandoned beds and equipment, a flight of stairs leading up to an unseen area that is not signposted, a set of double doors at the end of the hall, and an older couple in their 50s wearing reasonably modern clothes. The man is looking into the ward with his hand on the woman's shoulder, while the woman stands facing the wall. My mother looks around and suggests we go find someone to ask where we go from here and only notices this creepy couple standing right in front of us when I point them out. They acknowledge us differently than she did. As I ponder what to do, not wanting to be alone or go through the doors, a nurse in a different uniform opens the door, walks into the corridor, looks at us, and says, "You shouldn't be down here with us." I tell my mom to get back in the elevator, but she tries to ask the nurse where we need to go. The nurse replies with the highest button, so we get in and press the one she said. While the elevator takes us to an unknown destination, I feel uneasy about what just happened, so I try to understand it by asking if the nurse's uniform indicates that she works in a specific area or has advanced training. My mom used to work at the hospital cleaning, so she's seen most of the uniforms worn. She replies that the nurse may have come from another hospital for a training program or to assist. The elevator opens, and we get out and walk down another empty corridor. This time we bump into a nurse wearing the usual uniform walking back towards a different elevator. She stops us from going any further and tells us we are on the floor with the operating rooms, so we can't stay up there. We tell her that we are lost and get into the elevator with her, which puts us in a completely different part of the hospital where we need to be. Problem solved, apart from what I am convinced was an encounter with the paranormal. A few months ago my dad was in the hospital again, and during visiting hours one of his nurses came to talk to us. We had just been talking about what my parents described as a weird experience, and my dad asked the nurse if she knew where we could have been. She believes that we are joking with her and informs us that the only areas on those floors of the hospital are janitor's corridors, which contain only cupboards for cleaning supplies and no patient wards. When she realizes that we are serious, she says that maybe we bumped into the hospital ghost, an old nurse who has apparently been seen on the children's ward when a child is dying. After she leaves, the child makes a full recovery. I have heard this story before about a kind spirit who helps others, and I can 100% say that whatever we saw was unkind and unwanted. Of course I can't be sure that it really was paranormal and not just a lover of the paranormal being biased, but it didn't feel right. They weren't in old-fashioned clothes, see-through, or violent towards us, but I had this feeling of complete dread when we stepped out of that elevator. That, coupled with the fact that my mom didn't see the couple straight away, that the nurse said the area does not exist, and that we can only remember the clothing and hair color of anyone we saw on that floor, just the clothing and hair color, tells me that what we saw was abnormal and bad. I now absolutely fear going anywhere alone in the hospital, in case I see anything else I'd prefer to avoid. Even thinking about it gives me a shiver. My one and only ghost story happened at a hospital I worked at. I'm a blood bank technologist. Basically, I work in the lab at the hospital that tests patients' blood, figures out their type, and issues blood to whomever needs it. I worked in a very busy level 1 trauma center for 5 years. I worked the third shift, overnights, for most of that time. Some nights weren't very busy, and other nights I couldn't sit down because we had a trauma or surgical case that was going wrong. Our lab was located between the OR and 2 of the busiest ICUs in the hospital. We were 2 floors above the emergency department. I had never had any experience with the paranormal or ghosts before working in this lab. Our lab was really large, probably 20 yards in length. It was divided into 3 sections by half walls that were about my height, 5.5 feet, so you could see across the lab. We spent most of our time in the first area. Our boss's offices were located in the third area and had motion sensors for their lights. If it was a slow night, we would turn the lab lights off to save our eyes and maybe nap for a bit. One night, a series of events occurred that I have never explained. The entrance had several doors, and if they weren't all open or all closed, it would create a wind tunnel that would blow papers around. My partner left to get food downstairs and closed the door to stop the wind tunnel. After he was gone for a few minutes, I felt the wind kick up, and I heard it, loudly. All the papers flew off my desk. I got up to pick them up and apologized to whoever opened the door. We would get nurses at our door frequently, but the doors were still closed and no one was there. I looked across the lab and heard a chair move behind the half wall. In the darkened section, I saw a very tall shadow stand up. Whatever it was taller than 6 feet. I called out my partner's name. It didn't move. Then, by instinct, I said, "Go back upstairs." It moved to the right, toward where the wall ended, and vanished. Then, one of the office lights turned on. It stayed on the rest of the night. My partner and I couldn't get it to turn off. I thought I was seeing things because I was tired, but my husband, who worked third shift for many years, doubted it. He had never seen anything so specific and never felt anything either. I'm a nurse at a palliative care unit in an old hospital. Throughout my years working at this hospital, I've seen a lot, especially being in a palliative care unit. You see a lot of things other people wish they wouldn't. For some of us, at some point, we just have to accept things as they are. The unit I work in has 9 beds in 9 different bedrooms, all spread along a long corridor. At the start of the corridor is the lift, and coming out of it, you'd find the cleaning room on your right, where we keep all the cleaning equipment and products, and the nurse's room on your left, along with the entrance through the stairs. Because of the building and patient safety, and so we can access the other floors easily if needed, the administration forbade us from locking the stairs doors. This isn't ideal, because some of our patients, in their delusions, can go across our room's door unnoticed and will be a danger to themselves, so we always keep the doors closed by tying a bedsheet around the door handles to keep them together. This is important, so you know why what comes next started out so strange. The nurse's room is where we'll spend most of the night shifts doing all kinds of activities, including resting and actually sleeping. Usually, late at night, my routine would include checking on all our patients, checking on all the doors and windows to make sure they are all locked properly, checking on the doors to the stairs, and then spending most of the night checking patient files. This night in particular, I had finished with my rounds and was checking on all the cameras. When my nursing auxiliary came into the nurse's room, she asked me if anything else was needed or if she was okay to sleep for a while. I told her she was fine to go to sleep, so she took her shoes off, lay down with her back to the room and me, facing the wall, and went to sleep. I was reading a new patient's file, who was coming into our unit soon, to know what to expect and how to behave around him, when I started hearing footsteps walking up and down the unit's corridor. At first I ignored them, thinking I was just tired and that my ears were playing tricks on me. It wouldn't be the first time. As they persisted, though, I started wondering what was going on. I took another look at the cameras, but each and every one of the bedroom and corridor feeds seemed completely normal. The steps, though, kept coming all the way to the nurse's room, stopping about 2 steps away from showing at my door, then turning around and walking back all the way to the opposite end of the corridor. I waited to see if anything changed, but when it didn't, I stood up to go check. That's when one of our patients, the one in room number 7, started calling us frantically. My auxiliary nurse was still asleep, so I walked carefully out of the room, peeked out of the room, and looked around. There was nothing there, and the footsteps had stopped, so I rushed to the patient's room. When I got there, he was shouting frantically, huddling against the bed's headboard with what seemed like renewed energy, shouting at me to tell the man in the top hat sitting on the chair in the room to go away and leave him be. Usually, with patients like these in this state of stress, we just go along with their delusions to calm them down. If there are nurses watching, which I hope there are, you'll know what I mean. In this case, with him screaming in the room, I turned towards the chair and started talking to this imaginary man in a top hat, telling him he needed to go, that the visiting hours were done, and that he needed to leave right now or we'd have to call security. After this, the patient calmed down, thanked me effusively for sending the man away, and lay back down to rest. I went back to the nurse's room and back to studying the new patient. As I walked back in, my heart stopped. All I felt was panic gripping my heart inside me. As I stood there, not knowing what to do and looking at the surveillance cameras, there was a big shadow, standing right in the middle of the frame of the camera recording the end of the corridor, right in front of the bedroom I had just been in. I took one step back and leaned backward to check if I could see anything there, and there was nothing. I gave the cameras another quick glance, and the shadow was still there, standing terrifyingly still in front of this patient's bedroom door. This time, though, when I turned to look directly at the corridor again, this thing was there. For a moment, it felt like everything froze in place, and I just stood there, looking at it like a fool. Then, slowly, it turned towards me, a pair of strange, dark red eyes showing. It stood like that for a bit, screeched at me, and flew into the patient's bedroom, slamming the door behind it. My auxiliary nurse jumped awake at the slam of the door and started frantically asking me what was going on. I was out of breath by now. I told her what I had just seen and what had just happened, and she couldn't believe me. I asked her to come with me to the patient's bedroom, and she agreed, starting to become curious. We walked slowly through the corridor, passing every door carefully. I was afraid that anything would come flying at us. When we got to the bedroom this thing flew into, I pushed the door without going in to check for any kind of danger and immediately felt a breath of freezing air hit me in the face. The air con was on in every room and set to 23 degrees, so this was not normal. Nothing came flying at us, as I had feared, but there, right by the patient's bed, was a shadow. I could tell it was a man, tall and strong with a top hat over his head. I asked my auxiliary nurse if she could see him, not expecting a no. However, that's what I got. She couldn't see anything standing there, and definitely not as clearly as I could. Slowly, the shadow turned towards me again. This time, it didn't scream. This time, it slowly dissipated. Immediately I calmed down. Not only could I not see it anymore, but I also couldn't feel it. This sense of calm came over me, and the patient seemed okay, so we left the room and went back to the nurse's room. My colleague went back to sleep, but I didn't rest until I checked the rest of the unit to make sure everyone was safe. After that, I couldn't help but stare at the cameras every minute for the rest of the night. Eventually, our shift was over and would become the shift with the most intense experience I ever had. The next day, when nighttime came and I did all my rounds, I went inside room 7 to check on the patient. When I came closer to him, I realized he had passed away. This was my first experience with the shadow man in the top hat, but it wasn't the last, and it's still ongoing. I'm the only one who can see him around the unit, which freaks everyone out. Every single time I see him, it's under the same circumstances. I walk into a patient's room, and there's his shadow at the foot of their bed. I wait for a little while, until he turns to me and dissipates. 1 or 2 days later, the patient passes away. This is a real story, and it's something I have to live with almost every day now. I'm not sure if this thing is ending people or announcing their deaths, but if you are a nurse in a similar unit or know someone who is, please share this with them and comment on what you know about it. I need to know what this is, how to deal with it, and if anyone else has experienced the same as me, even if it's a different looking entity. If you're dealing with something like this yourself, know that you're not the only one. Maybe this will help you feel less afraid. Experience in a hospital. Last year I, 31 female, worked briefly at a hospital for the Environmental Services Department. So, I was a housekeeper. After a couple months I was given a fairly regular area to clean daily, the step-down ICU. Only some of the rooms were monitored by video camera there, typically the ones that weren't in direct view of the nurse's station. My job included daily cleaning of the rooms that were occupied, the nurses' stations, the doctor's rooms, and any public bathrooms in the area. I was also responsible for fully cleaning a room when a patient was discharged. One day I was assigned to fully clean one of the rooms that is monitored. It is around the corner from the main nurse's station and close to the end of the hall. After I'm done, I walk around the corner, look up at the monitor streaming the feed from the video camera in that room, and see someone standing in the doorway. I immediately go back to see if anyone is there, but there isn't. I go into the room to check for a person, and there's nothing. The room right next door is empty, but I check there too, and nothing. Anyone would have had to pass me if they left the area. I go back to check the screen, and the doorway is empty, so I just continue with my day. About a week later an elderly woman was brought to said room. I go in to do my daily cleaning, introducing myself and telling her all about what I'm going to do. She seems out of it, pleasant but not fully there at the moment. The curtains are drawn, so it's fairly dim, but not dark. After I start cleaning, she asks me, "How many of us are in here?" I'm taken aback for a second but respond with, "It's just you and I right now. Do you see someone else?" She just says quietly, "Oh no, I guess not." I tell her if there's anything at all that she needs, there's a number on the card she can call, and they can page me directly. I went around the corner to check the video feed and didn't see anything, but I had a weird feeling about it. After that I made sure to stop by that room a few times a day to check on any patient that was in there. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life. I feel I'm highly sensitive to them. This one was just one of the more recent ones that stood out to me. The student nurse/patient and I witnessed a ghost. I'm from the UK, and I work as a district nurse. This is a nurse who visits patients in their homes, care homes, etc., just not in a hospital setting. I've done my time in hospitals, no more, thank you. I've been wanting to tell this story for a while. It's short, but also I knew I wanted to describe it in proper and clear detail. So I've been waiting for some spare time to sit down and get started. A little about me. I've been a nurse for almost 20 years. I've seen and dealt with most things you can think of. I've always had an interest in the mysterious side of life. However, it wasn't until nursing that I started to believe in ghosts. Now I question what ghosts even are. I consume paranormal podcasts, alleged true stories, and true crime. As I'm sure you hear all the time, this is a true story. I am sharing this to create a discussion, to reinforce that professional people can experience paranormal situations, and to get it written down before some parts are lost to time from my aging brain. I would like to hear your feedback and thoughts about what my student and I saw. Dog and coffee at hand and helping me write this to the best of my abilities, Anyway, let's begin. Approximately 2 years ago on a cloudy British July day, I was mentoring a third-year nursing student. The nursing student was close to qualifying and was what we call a mature student. They have kids and have gone back to university later on in life. I'll call her M. M was naturally good with people. She was honest and caring. M and I went to see a patient, whom I will refer to as P, who had complex needs. She needed observations, vitals, checking, blood taken, and wounds redressing. She lived in an old semi-detached house on the outskirts of a small town. Due to the complexity of the visit, I needed to collect items from my car boot, trunk. I advised M to go in and introduce herself and start her assessment on P. We give third-year students more autonomy. Once I had collected all the items, such as the BP monitor, HR/SPO2 monitor, blood bottles, etc., I locked my car, entered the small front garden, then knocked on the white up front door and walked in. The layout of the house when walking in through the front door, directly in front was a thin hallway leading to an interior door, to the left were stairs leading to the first floor, second if you're American, and to the right was an open door that led into the living room, where the bay window was at the front of the property. I walked in, saying hello. My eyes naturally went to the open living room, where I saw an old lady. I'll describe her later. I heard my student call me from behind the door at the end of the hallway. I walked down said hallway and opened the door, where I saw M speaking P in her kitchen area.
Without concern, we carried out the care for P, M doing most of the work with little input.
The whole visit took approximately 30 minutes. As things were wrapping up, I asked P who the lady was in her room. She said something along the lines of lady? What lady? The TV's on, I said. No, the lady in your room. P again said, I'm the only one in my house.
I looked at M, I guess trying to think.
However, as I did, I noticed she had gone white and her eyes were wide. She looked scared. I advised them both to hold on 2 minutes. I am now thinking a confused lady had entered the patient's house. However, getting to the living room, no one was there and no TV was on. Besides, it was a tiny 20 thing. I checked upstairs, nothing. As stated in the layout, the front door is opposite to where I was along the hall. So I would have seen/heard someone leave. I said to P, no one's there, I must need a break. P laughed and expressed her gratitude to M and me. Before I get to what M and I discussed, here's what I saw. I saw an old lady, approximately 5 feet 3 inches tall with short white permed hair. She was wearing a brownish pleated skirt, small flat dark shoes, and a light blouse, I think white. She had her back to me and was walking away. She was only approximately 4 feet away from me. She was solid as if I were looking at M or anyone else I interact with. I saw no part of her face. In some ways I'm glad. As soon as M and I stepped outside the property, I made sure to clear my mind and avoid any potential biases. I asked M to describe exactly what she saw. She described the lady's appearance as being exactly the same as what I had observed and written down. The only difference was, she said she was nearing a chair and moving in a manner that indicated she was about to sit down. However, she too didn't see her face. This creeped me out. I had just seen a ghost with a witness. Did I see a ghost? Did I witness a time slip? Or was it a conscious spirit inhabiting a house she may have lived in? I should also mention that, although she wore clothes typically associated with older women, they did not appear outdated, if that makes sense. I see other old ladies wearing similar clothes to her. What are your thoughts? Weird last moment with my grandfather. Let me start this off by saying I am not religious by any means, and neither was my grandfather. We were not biologically related either, only by marriage. My grandmother is Catholic but never tried to influence us. This event occurred a couple months ago, just after having already lost my mother. My grandfather was in the hospital with advanced muscular dystrophy and pneumonia. It wasn't looking good for him. One of the things that crushed my family the most was that he was absolutely terrified of dying. He was constantly intubated and unable to talk, but when he could, he would rant about how scared he was. It really was heartbreaking. When his last days came, all immediate family was in town to say goodbye. He experienced constant anxiety due to his fears, which often resulted in him being sedated. I was in the room with him and my grandmother crying and saying goodbye. Suddenly, his heart monitor sounded, indicating that his heart had stopped. It was terrifying. Doctors ran in but did nothing because my grandmother had signed a DNR. She had every right, there was a 100% chance of him dying anyway, and he was already suffering so much. He always knew it would get bad, and he always told her to do it. It was also in his will. Had he been in his right mind, he would have supported it. The nurse walked up to feel for a pulse and got nothing. But then the strangest thing happened. While the nurse had her hand on my shoulder, she unplugged the breathing machine and pulled the tube out of his throat, and then he came back. Completely on his own. This had happened a couple times when he was resuscitated but never on his own. We were all shocked. He very obviously could barely breathe, but he looked different. This is what happened. He looked at my grandmother and drew a heart shape on her arm. He had a very peaceful smile on his face. He looked at the nurse at the foot of the bed and said, "You, good." I have no idea what that meant. Then he looked at me, and I swear to God, he was staring into my soul. Even though he obviously couldn't breathe, he sounded perfectly normal when he looked at me and said, "Yes, underscore. It's going to be okay." Smiled again, said indistinguishable, waiting, closed his eyes, and passed. The strangest part was that when he looked at me, I didn't feel as though it was really him. Like it was something much bigger, almost. I don't know, deeper. This is a man who did not believe in God. Blasphemed him when possible. Not an easy ticket into heaven, you know? My personal belief is that if there is a God, then it's not the jealous and demanding one that Christians believe in. No disrespect to anyone. I really don't think there is a God. Honestly, aliens make more sense to me, if that says anything. But I felt as though something was reassuring me, like something was telling me I was right. About which theory, I don't know. It was the strangest thing. I guess I will always question it. The nursing home. I used to work as a carer at a nursing home on the night shift, the creepiest one you'll probably ever see. The nursing home, owned by nuns who live on site, boasts a creepy, huge Catholic building, numerous statues out front, and an incredibly long driveway, making it an absolute nightmare to navigate at night. Any agency staff we had come in would always say how they didn't want to come in. The place has a horrible history too, but I don't think that's relevant to the story. It also might give too much information away. Both of the experiences I've had may seem minor, but they left me utterly terrified. I've had many experiences where I thought I saw residents out of the corner of my eye, but as a skeptical believer, I do not consider any of them worthy of a story. Starting with the milder experience of the two, all staff get a desk phone. You receive buzzer notifications on it as well as being able to call your partner and the night nurse on duty. I was in a resident's room and helped them urinate into a bottle, as they were bedbound. I went to leave the room, and the door just wouldn't open. I yanked and yanked, checked the lock, and nothing worked. The bathrooms in this facility had 2 adjoining rooms sharing one ensuite, so I thought, okay, I'll walk through the bathroom to the adjacent room and leave from there. The bathroom door wouldn't open, even with excessive yanking, and was unlocked. My resident and I locked eyes, and of course I was feeling panicked, but it was the panic in his eyes staring back at me that really set the unsettled feeling in my chest off. I tried the front door again, going as far as having my foot on the wall as I pulled, but nothing happened. That's when my dumb ass finally remembered my deck phone. I planned to call my partner to come help. I continued pulling on the door as I pulled the phone out of my pocket, and the second I pulled it out, the door suddenly released, which I wasn't expecting, so it jolted me. I just looked the resident in the eyes again and said, "I'm just going to keep this open." Still wide-eyed, he just looked at me and slowly nodded. Now the terrifying one of the two. I understand that people who listen to this may not believe me. I understand that, if someone told me, I would probably think, yeah, right, but I swear to God this happened, and it's probably the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Part of being a night shift caregiver is that, between pat rounds, we do safety and monitoring rounds. You go check every room and peek in to make sure everyone is okay, nobody has fallen, nobody has died, etc. The area I was working that night was, I want to say 60 to 70 rooms spread across 3 floors, and there are only 2 caregivers for that whole area. So while my partner on shift was doing the paperwork, I went to do a check. All was fine until I was on the bottom floor and walked down one of the wings and heard muttering. I worked out what room it was by getting closer and assumed it was the TV. I stood in the door and could see the TV was off, so I thought, okay, he must be talking to himself or sleep talking. Before I go further, it's important to note the rooms in this area had back doors to another corridor we never use, and honestly, I don't know why. Anyway, back to it, I took a few steps in and heard snoring. I still heard the muttering getting louder. I walked in further until I could finally see the resident in bed, snoring loudly, while the muttering continued to grow louder. Incredibly confused, I looked around the room. When my eyes went to the back door, which was a screen door, nothing was there, but I heard something like, I don't know how to describe it other than a whisper yell. Something whispered and yelled at me, saying, "Don't look at me," as if it were alive. Whispery tone, but it was also yelling. Regardless, I hastily fled the scene, almost tripping over myself. I didn't finish checking the rooms in that wing. Instead, I ran straight to the elevator, went up, and informed my partner about what happened, asking him to complete my check down there since I knew he wouldn't be able to get me back down for the rest of the night. I've never experienced anything like that again, but the level of fear is beyond comprehension. I saw nothing, yet something's telling me to look at it. I was not okay. I know it seems fake, but honestly it happened. Even my partner didn't believe me. Side note, I never saw or heard anything about it myself, but quite a few residents near the end of their life used to ask about the children in their room, always the ones on their way out. The facility also used to be an orphanage, so take from that what you will. I don't have any more crazy experiences to tell, so this will be my last. Thank you for listening. A shrine at the hospital. Long ago, I lived with my family in a government quarter behind the hospital in a town just south of Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. Being the restless teenager, I cycled everywhere every time I could leave the house. Sometimes, I would go into the hospital compound to visit a small coffee shop that sold my favorite sweets. I would also get a drink and enjoy it there to replenish my energy before more cycling. Beside the shop stood a small shrine dedicated to one of the Hindu deities, Ganesh with the elephant head. At the time the shrine looked new. I was there buying some sweets when they had a puja, consecration, ceremony for the newly installed statue of the deity. That was when I learned that the shop owner's son was the one who built the shrine. He was an orderly at the hospital. A pleasant-looking man whom I sometimes see there helping out at the shop. One day, I heard a man ask the son why he built the shrine. This is the son's story, which I will tell from his perspective. This may not be as accurate because it has been decades, and I am translating from a mix of Tamil, Malay, and English. The son's story. A year ago, I was working late. So, I came to help my father close up for the night. After my father left for home, I stayed behind to finish up some paperwork. It was almost midnight when I locked up and started to walk down the walkway past the morgue to the exit. In front of the morgue, I came across a young man who was crying inconsolably. This was not unusual at the hospital. I asked the man if he was okay and if he needed some help. The man turned to me and said, "They must hate me, Ane." Ane is Tamil for big brother and also a term of respect that we, regardless of race, use to address an older Indian man. Why do you say that, Thambi? Thambi means younger brother, also a term of endearment. I've been here since last night, and no one has come for me, said the young man, who I think must have been Malay or Chinese. Don't be like that, Thambi, maybe they are on their way. I'm sure they'll be here tomorrow. Trust me, I said. That seemed to calm the man down a little. Thank you, Ane, he said as he lifted his head and smiled at me. I'll never forget that face and the smile. I don't know why. So, I left him and went home. He waved. I waved back. The next day, a family came to claim their son's remains. They came from clear across the country, and back then the roads were not as good as they are today. So, it took them a while to get here. They told us that their son, who was studying at a university nearby, had been involved in a road collision and had passed away. When they received the news, they were at their farm, which was far in the interior, that made their journey take longer. The medical officer instructed me to check the identity of the remains in the morgue. I took a member of the family with me, and we headed to the morgue. When I pulled away the shroud to reveal the face of the body, it struck me that this was the young man whom I had spoken to the night before. Half of his face was gone, but I could still recognize him. His father verified that this was indeed his son, and then he cried. I led him out to where his family was waiting. Then I left them and came back to the morgue to finish up my job. You don't need to be sad, Thambi. Your family is here. They love you very much. I'll get you ready, and then you can go home, Thambi, I said to the body. I looked away from the face to check the tag against the paperwork on my clipboard. When I saw the face again, I was about to cover it with the shroud. I could have sworn that he smiled just a little. The next day, I asked for permission to build this shrine so that perhaps the spirits from the morgue will not wander around this place at night. This was years ago. The shop, the shrine, the morgue, and a couple of the buildings nearby are now gone. Multi-story buildings now stand in their place. In one of the buildings, not far from where the old morgue was, you'll find the new morgue. Weird encounters at an old hospital. So a bit of backstory, there used to be an old hospital near me, which was shut down in the early 2000s. Anyway, I and a few friends would usually go up there and look around, as we found exploring these places interesting, and it was always quiet up there, so it was also an escape for us. After a while, though, things got weird. Now, this may sound cliché, but it began with minor occurrences, such as creaking and doors closing, which could have been attributed to the wind or the building's age. We didn't pay much attention to these minor disturbances, as they were not significant. It all started getting weird a few months after these small occurrences. The first occurrence was unsettling, but it didn't compel us to leave permanently. We were sitting on the second floor just chatting when a gust of air was followed by a horrid screech that still haunts my nightmares, filling the atmosphere with a dark sense of fear and anger. All the doors on the second floor slammed shut, and we dipped as fast as we could. The second, and probably the scariest, is what stopped us from going there before it got demolished forever. It was just before summer break, and it was our last day before we moved on to college or work. This time, we decided as a group to go up there and look around, knowing that we would never have this opportunity again since it was scheduled for demolition soon. We all surveyed the ground floor, finding nothing unusual. It was empty as usual. And then we get to the second floor again, but this time we instantly hear the sound of slate being walked on, or more like being run on. It was coming towards the stairs. We all ran out the window and are now on the roof. Fortunately, there's a dirt mound to land on, making the roof low enough for us to jump off without any injuries. After landing on the dirt mound, we quickly ran into the woods, but just before that, I caught a glimpse of an old-style nurse outfit, like the ones from the 80s. After getting away from the hospital, I turned to my friend, and we both just say, "Did you see that thing?" We avoid talking about it because we're both unsure what happened that day. We never returned to see what it was and never will. That place. I'm glad it's gone because it was the scariest place I've ever been, based on that experience. I thought I'd share this with you lot, as I need help figuring this out so I can get some closure. Angels in the hospital. The year was 1968, and my family was living in Hollywood, California. This was a time when nobody locked their doors at night and your children could play safely outside until the streetlights came on. I was very small for my age and the youngest of 6. This occurred a few weeks before my 5th birthday. It was a normal day, kids were playing outside, and some of my siblings were riding their bikes and playing in the courtyard. Well, I wanted to ride on the back of my brother's bike, but he was playing with my sister Melanie. I remember hopping up and down on the sidewalk, bugging my older siblings to give me a ride, so my sister Rachel gave in, and I think she was tired of hearing me beg. Our mother had told us to never ride our bikes without wearing shoes, but Rachel, being hard-headed, often ignored that rule. She picked me up, placed me on the back of her bike with a banana seat, and instructed me to hold on to the sissy bar. Well, the moment I realized she didn't have pegs for my feet, I got scared. No. I'm scared. I changed my mind. I remember telling her repeatedly that I was scared, but at that point, she was determined to take me for a ride. She told me that it would be fine if I just held my feet out wide. Well, Rachel had a tendency to sway every time she pumped the pedal, and my little legs were teetering back and forth until whoosh. My foot went into the bicycle spoke and cut off my toe. Blood was everywhere, and I started screaming, so she grabbed me up and ran with blood streaming right past my other siblings and right into the apartment. Oh, the look on my mother's and eldest sister's faces, they were hysterical, so my sister Charity wrapped my foot with a towel and ran, carrying me outside, where we all piled into the station wagon, leaving my brother and Melanie at home. The ride to the hospital was terrifying. Mom was screaming and honking the horn, my eldest sister was talking rapidly while holding my foot above her head, and Charity was stroking my face, wiping my tears, and cupping my cheeks to prevent me from seeing how severe my injury was. I think I was in shock because it really didn't hurt as much until it started to throb in the car. We must have been a sight. A crazy woman trying to get help and her kids all covered in blood with my foot in the air. Needless to say, they took us in right away. Going through the corridors, I remember the smell of rubbing alcohol and mercurochrome. They rushed me into a room with a metal table, and right away I was frightened. They unwrapped the towel from my foot, and I saw my toe, blackened by bike chain grease. Mama kept assuring me that everything was going to be okay, but the look on her face told me differently. You see, I lost too much blood. The doctor asked if she had the rest of my toe, so she called home and asked my brother and my sister to go find it. This is the funny part. My brother and my sister Melanie walked down the street to the location of the incident. While they were searching the sidewalk and street, an old lady sitting on her porch asked them what they were doing. My brother told her that he was looking for his little sister's toe so the doctors could sew it back on. The old lady informed him that she had seen the toe, placed it in a baggie, and thrown it in the big dumpster. She told him that if he wanted it, he would need to climb in and dig it out, which he proceeded to do. After he found it, he jumped out. My sister Melanie, who was standing there the whole time with her eyes bigger than saucers, went with him to the neighbor's apartment to ask his friend's mom for a ride to the hospital. The second she opened the door, she stepped back, holding her nose because my brother smelled like trash, so she put a towel on her seat and gave them a ride. In the meantime I am still in the room, and they are using long needles to numb my foot, and I am crying my little eyes out. At one point my mother had her eyes closed, so I asked her what she was doing. As my voice skipped a breath, she told me to calm down. Shh, she said, see the white light around you, envision God's white healing light all around you, and calm down. I closed my eyes and tried my best to calm down, but the pain was too great. I gripped the sheet and tried to be brave, but it didn't work. My heart was racing, and the noise in the room made it difficult for me to relax. By now the other half of my toe had showed up, and they started preparing me for surgery. I pleaded with my mother to stay with me, but of course the doctors said no, so I started freaking out. My mother felt helpless, so she held me one last time. While I was in her arms, I saw a bright light over her shoulder. It was so bright that I squinted my eyes and tried to move her aside to see what it was. A man with long black hair, caramel-colored skin, and a glowing face stood there smiling at me in a long orange robe. Standing next to him was what looked like a beautiful male angel so bright that his light filled the room. I felt warmth come all over my body, and a sense of peace calmed my heart. I looked at my mother and told her that she could leave and not to worry. She looked confused, so I told her that my guardian angel was standing right there with another one of my angels. "Don't you see them?" I asked my mother and Charity, but they didn't see anything. She put my hand on her cheek, and I told her not to cry because I wasn't scared anymore. They wheeled me into the operating room and gave me something that put me to sleep, telling me that I would wake up soon. I remember seeing the doctors and nurses all working on me with a big round light blocking out their faces, and I was hearing them talk. My body felt light, and I felt myself floating up over their heads, and I saw my little body lying there. Looking over to the other side of the room, I noticed a man in an orange robe extending his hand, while the angel smiled and emitted a calming vibration. I heard the doctor talking to the nurse, expressing his concern that his daughter, who is very sick and needs to have an important operation soon, is about the same age as I am. I looked up at the angel's face, and she nodded her head and smiled. It felt like only moments had passed when I was being pulled back into my body. I woke up seeing my mother's beautiful face smiling and her eyes full of tears. They told my mother that I would have to have quite a few more operations before I could walk and that I might have a limp. They also said that I was lucky my injury did not affect my entire foot, considering my small size. I was put in the pediatric burn ward because there were no regular rooms. The room smelled weird, and it had to be kept cold. There were 4 other girls in there, some lying in contraptions to hold them still. The only bed they had for me was a big metal crib with bars that went all the way up like a cage. I didn't know I would be staying there all night. I thought my mother meant I would only be there for a little while and that I would be going home soon. The staff asked my eldest sister whether I was capable of feeding myself, and since I could, she replied affirmatively, prompting the nurse to make a note of it. After my family left for the night, I think, because of all the commotion in the room with the other patients, it didn't truly set in that I was all alone. One girl stood too close to the floor heater, which caused her nightgown to catch fire, another girl was playing with matches, and a third girl reached over the stove and caught her sleeve on fire. Well, the girl with the nightgown was lying in a contraption that held her in place, and she was watching TV through a mirror because her chin was stuck to her chest. This was all very traumatic for me. I didn't understand what was going on. It was time for bed, and after all the visitors had left, the nurses came in, placed sandbags between some of the girls' legs to prevent them from touching each other while they slept, and then covered them with a sheet. They cried in pain being moved, so when the nurse came to me and asked if I wanted a blanket, I thought she was going to do the same thing to me, and I already had a stabilizer on my foot, so being scared, I said no. The lights were dim and the TV was off. A few faint moans were made from the other girls throughout the night, and I was missing my mom. The night was long, and I was so cold that I started to shiver and quietly cried to myself, soaking my pillow with tears. When I felt the same warmth I had felt before, I reached through the bars toward the light, and someone held my hand. I didn't feel like crying anymore, and my eyes became very heavy, and I fell asleep. The next morning the nurses woke us up bright and early, and the hospital was bustling with different noises. An orderly came in and put my food on a tray. She said that the chart indicated I could feed myself, and then she left. Well, there was a stabilizer on my foot, and there were bars on my bed, so I couldn't feed myself if I wanted to. I lay there, and it felt like forever since I saw my family, and I was hungry. I almost started to cry when I heard a voice. "Hey you. Little girl, over here." I tried to prop myself up to see who was calling me, but I didn't see anyone. "I saw you last night," the voice said. "Who was that by your bed?" The girl across from me was looking through her mirror and moved her foot, telling me, "I'm right here." She asked me again, so I told her that it was my angel. She said that she wished she had an angel, so I told her that she does, she just can't see her. I think that made her feel better, but that's what I believe to be true. My family came and went, leaving me with my blanket, and the next day I was able to go home. On the way out I insisted on seeing the doctor who was sewing my toe. I said that I had something very important to tell him right away. The nurse thought that was cute, I guess, so she called him on the intercom, and shortly he arrived to meet us in the hall. He asked me what he could do for me, So I motioned him down to the wheelchair with my finger and said that I needed to tell him something in his ear, so he bent down to my face, and I whispered, "Thank you." Then I told him that his daughter will be just fine, I know it. I told him that she won't be sick anymore, so he shouldn't worry. Then I kissed him on his cheek. He stood up and stuttered, holding his mouth, and then he hugged my mom for a long time. My mother didn't know what to think, so on the way home I told her all about my new friends in the burn ward and all the things that happened to me there. As I got older, my mother told me that it never surprised her when I was little because I was always saying unusual things or experiencing unexplained events around me. I miss my mother. Thank you everyone for listening to all the stories. We hope you enjoyed these. We really appreciate all the support from you all. Have a wonderful week ahead.